Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devin Decker, and joining me, my host companion, Sejan Sarowick. Sejan?
Hey, Dev. What's going on, man?
I am feeling kind of over the moon right now. I am just so friggin' excited because the Cincinnati Bengals won the Super Bowl!
You sounded like a fill-in robot. Yeah, the big game. I don't know if we could say the other word. Can we say the other words? I don't know. Did we ever get a ruling on that?
Technically, we're not supposed to say Super Bowl, and I don't really care about that. I mean, the most they come by and they're like, how dare you say that? We're not here for monetary gain. Do you make money from the Say Report? If you do, I'm very disappointed in you for not disclosing it to me, but
Yeah,
probably not as
not
upset
all
as
that you
Uncle
would be aware
Sam.
of.
I know. I've seen your tax records, Sejan, so I know. I know. I was giving you the opportunity
It's
to
the three
come
people
clean.
you never lied to, man. Your accountant, your lawyer, and your podcast host companion.
That's what they say. I think Bernie Madoff put that in a book, right?
Right.
Hi. So welcome to the Say Report. Cincinnati Bengals are the Super Bowl champions. I think that's probably, we got one more usage of that. We'll hold on to it. And I'm excited, but mostly I'm excited for my old roommate, Mark, because he was a huge Bengals fan. Being from Cincinnati, I mean, it makes sense.
There is no more like home team love than I've ever seen for the Bengals, a team that does not deserve it. And I mean, I'm not talking like the obsession that you get with, like, say, like a Sox fan, right? Like, believe me, there were decades where they didn't deserve that either. But like that was like on a level of like a religion, right? And the Bengals are not that, because there's definitely an air of, we know, every time you talk to a Bengals fan, but they're never afraid to admit it. And you gotta love that.
Kind of short of Cleveland now Guardians fans.
Yeah.
Everyone in Ohio kind of understands what's going on with their sports teams. And that is the thing that I have always respected about them.
You're not
above
Ohio
all else.
State.
Yeah.
Essentially the feeling with every sports team, even the Cavs. Yeah.
It's just that they, like, they do well and they're like, yeah, we did well, but we know that there's gonna be some time where we're gonna be the butt of the joke, and karmically, I suppose it's worth it because they get the win every so often. But yeah, just shout out to Mark and his Cincinnati Reds hat and his Cincinnati Bengals jersey. You were my best roommate of all the roommates that I've ever had. And not just because we both could put up with the other one coming in very drunk and just vandalizing the crap out of our room. Yeah. Good times. We don't work for that company anymore, so we can do it. There's a hanging bar. So we shared bunk beds. We worked on the cruise ship together. That's how I know Mark. And the upper bunk bed is just a bunk bed, and then there's a very small bar to, I guess, keep you from falling out of bed if, the ship lists or something.
Yeah. You don't go rolling out of bed. It's to let your body know. It's like the sleep strip on the highway. It's to let your body know where the edge of the bed is.
You should probably wake up because you're falling out of this bed. Is essentially what that thing is. And multiple times, one or both of us would get so drunk that bar offended us to no end, and we would do whatever it took to just rip it out.
I can fall out of bed if I like. This is the best kind of drunk vandalism. The one that once you sober up has no justification.
It's one of those situations where, like, and then like the next day it would be, you were drunk last night. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, you ripped up. I'm like, I thought it felt different sleeping in my bed, because also I was the top bunk guy, so it was always putting my life in danger doing this. But the best part about it was our room steward would just have it replaced. Like, and you tip your room steward even when you're working on the ship, but it'd be one of those situations where we would just be like, oh, we don't know what happened. It just fell off. And let me tell you, it's difficult for it just to fall off. It's constructed with like two 1.5-inch pieces of metal going in under the bed. So for you
Almost
to
as if you're on a boat and the last thing they need is for pieces to just randomly fall
fall
apart,
off, yeah.
even
But
if it is inside.
But we did it multiple times while we were there. Like, it was just one of those things that we did. And then Mark, like years later, because he continued to work on ships after I had stopped, sent me a message saying, I ripped off the upper bunk railing last night. It just wasn't the same without you. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of sweet.
Oh,
And
man.
I have, as much as you lived in the area of the Cincinnati Bengals, the person who's been on my mind for this wonderful victory has been Mark. So I just wanted to congratulations, Cincinnati Bengals. And now the reveal that we are recording before the Super Bowl. I had to save the one. So that's all conjecture. Everything that we just said is conjecture. But the Say Report, if known for a couple of things, is speaking nonsense to truth. Meaning we make a bunch of stuff happen in this world, almost as if we're somehow main characters.
So there you
And
go, Bengal fans. This one's for you.
you're welcome. And if not, hi to the children of Africa that we ended up sending this outdated and incorrect podcast to.
Hope you like the listening and the t-shirts.
I hope you like the
Man.
t-shirts. The Say Report celebrates
I-
the Bengals winning the Superb Owl are my favorite shirts we've ever designed.
I don't know if I'll ever really kind of get over the whole L.A. St. Louis Rams stuff. Like I don't know, man. Like we came up kind of and became adults at a time, at a weird time in sports, because in addition to a lot of that sort of stuff going on, because that was like 2013, right? Like that was 2012.
The St.
or
Louis
something like
Rams?
that?
Oh no, that was
No,
early.
when do they move to LA? When did they
Oh,
move
they
to
moved to LA. Ooh, I want to say like
2009?
2016. Maybe
Yeah,
maybe
it
soon.
was-
Like there was a whole episode of Life in Pieces where like CBS totally just simped for the LA Rams.
Yeah.
Like, we got tickets to the football game, and it's like nobody really cares to go to the Rams. Don't matter the way that the LA Raiders did. Like,
Well, and the Rams don't matter to LA the way that they did to St. Louis. That being said, I mean, like there's a whole bunch of weird shit about them leaving, right? Like they left like the city in like $300 million in debt or something like that because they just weren't taking care of the stadium that the city built for them and crap like that. And it was like lawsuits about how there was like no lighting and shit in the building.
yeah,
It was a weird situation. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like they should have stayed in St. Louis in the situation they were in. Something had to change, but it was just really weird because we also when we were in college together, or at least a little bit after we left college, was when LeBron left. Was it LeBron that? Yeah, LeBron that left
LeBron
the
left
Cavs, right?
the Cavs
And,
to
like,
go to Miami.
and, like,
Actually, I was
people were, like,
working on the
burning their
cruise ship
jerseys.
to talk
it was
about
my
it.
first
Yeah.
year it was my first year in Ohio, I think, or my second year in Ohio.
Yeah.
And like people were just like losing their freaking shit because of that too. We had a lot of really weird little controversies like that.
Yeah, it's strange. Like sports have been far more controversial in the, let's say, 30 years that you and I have been on this planet than before it. I mean, yes, you had things like the Black Sox scandal and everything like that, but it does feel like every year we have a controversy. And the controversies are becoming so thick, so palpable that there are biopics being made about them.
Funny enough. Yeah, we'll get to that. Don't worry. But I do think, though, it's an interesting thought, the idea that somehow it's become more controversial. Is it that, or is it that we have invested so much more of like our identities in sports that like it's become more important to us and thus like more prevalent in like reporting and all that sort of stuff because we just care more now. You know what I mean? Like it's not that there wasn't always a bunch of weird shady shit going on in sports, as you pointed out. Like there's always been weird controversies about money and about cheating and all of that sort of stuff. But like we are so much like tied to sports as an identity now, almost as much as like in this country in particular as politics, in a weird way that we weren't in the past, right? Like there has been an evolution in the ways in which we use kind of these things to define ourselves, and that is what makes these controversies seem bigger, I guess.
I
or
mean, I
more often.
understand that, but I actually think the problem with these controversies is the fact that there is more accountability in terms of the reporting is better.
Yeah.
With a 24-hour news cycle, I mean, you have to keep
It's a
people
snake eating itself, though,
invested.
right?
Yeah, it's an
Right.
Ouroboros.
The reason there's more accountability is because we realize we care more, right? And
Yeah.
we care more because there's more accountability, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's one. No, I think that the accountability is not feeding us caring more. I think us caring more is just the fact that as time has gone on, we have lost other things to become invested in. Like politics. Let's talk about that. Politics now is not the fun or interesting thing. It was like you don't want to tell people that you're a politically minded person because you're not going to get invited to the parties that you would have got invited to before, if that makes
Mm.
any sense.
Yeah.
Like it's like because politics now is just so incendiary, whereas sports it's like, oh no, it's just a way to pass the time. And you go even that step forward with like something like esports, sports being so prevalent that games and video games get to become a part of that because sports just matter more than anything else in our country, specifically our own personal American society,
Yeah.
and other like-minded ones like Canada. Canada kind of enters that conversation too. So I guess sort of North American society in a
Yeah.
way. I don't know. Sorry. I don't want to say that
I mean,
accountability is I think where we're aware of these controversies and we want
like
to
it's
hear
more than
about
just
them.
it's more than just North America when those conversations come into play.
True.
We are literally sitting in one of the most controversial Olympics that has ever, like, literally. There's been more like do not or did not finishes, DNFs, right? I was reading this stat the other day. Apparently, the last time there was this many DNFs in any competition in the Winter Olympics was apparently like 1918 or something like that. They were in St. Louis, funny enough, and the problem was there was no snow anywhere, so there was just a bunch of athletes that just couldn't finish the sports that they were participating in because the conditions were just unlike playable. And rather than like cancel events, players were just taking DNFs left and right. And like since for over 100 years we have not let that happen again, right? And now here we are where for other reasons we've got a bunch of people that are just saying like conditions are untenable for their sport and for their for their health and things like that. I mean, like, and then that's just the big obvious one at the moment. But I mean, like, we've got the World Cup coming up in a couple of years here that we're gonna have to start talking about. We've got all sorts of different international sports scandals as well. And I think that outside of America, things like, for instance, football, like European football, actual football, has like
Soccer
been
for you uncouth American.
has been a hugely important and influential piece of people's identities for much longer than sports in America, period. It's just that there's definitely a feeling over the last 20 or 30 years that people have in lieu of creating their own personalities been very happy to just adopt certain sports fan identities, and not everybody, but some people. That has become something that people have fallen back on, much like there have been people that have decided to fall back on politics as identity, or anything else. Or you mentioned video games. Like, we have an entire generation of people now where there's a small portion of them. I don't think it's as big as we give them we give them too much screen time, I think, but there is a bunch of people out there that do identify as quote unquote gamer, and that is just their entire identity to the point where they become cringe because of it, right?
Yeah, I suppose the only reason that it's difficult for me to agree with what you're saying, while completely understanding that it is out there, it's a thing. It's not one of those situations where I don't believe what you're saying is true. It's just hard for me to visualize it and kind of
That there were controversies in sports
no,
we cared.
not the controversy in sports before we cared. The fanaticism and the people defining themselves by sports teams is so difficult for me because I know very few people who do that. Like in my personal microcosm, if that makes sense.
Talk
Like
to any Manchester fan.
right, okay, but that's
Like,
that's completely different. Like I understand the fanaticism that surrounds football in Europe and all of that. I get that because
right.
I've seen that. I've seen the riots. I know what can happen there. But again, knowing that something exists and having it touch you personally are two very different things. And it's one of those things where sports-wise, I really have never met people who are only defined by the fact that they are fans of a specific sports team.
Sure. I mean, like, part of it is the idea that, like, once you talk to a human being, they're more complex than that. Like, I'm only talking about, like,
No,
the idea that, but I mean, as you just mentioned, right? Like, you like roomed with a guy that like hung a bunch of shit on his walls, and like that was what he did. But it wasn't just sport, right? It was specifically the Bengals, or was it, But like, even on top of that, I don't think it's hard. I don't think I'm stalking out of line here when I say that there are people out there that take sports too seriously.
that's
Period.
true. That is definitely true. I guess seeing somebody who like my identity is Republican, my identity is Democrat, those people I've met in this world. Like I've
Hmm.
met people like that, but I've not really met somebody who's like my identity is Red Sox fan. My identity is Steelers
As
fan.
somebody that was in college with me at the same time that somebody lit a car on fire when they won the World Series, I can't believe that you were like, I don't know if I've ever met anybody that is that obsessed
But
with the
again,
Red
no,
Sox.
that's what I'm talking about though. We're talking macro to microcosm. On a macrocosmic level, I understand that people that crazy about these teams exist.
No,
But
I'm
in
just
my
saying I
own
can't believe you
personal
avoided them. We were literally in classrooms with them. So like
I
the
know,
fact that you're like I never met one is like bizarre to me.
yeah, I guess and it could be that thing that people, once you know them, become more complex. But even then, like, there are still those people who become more complex. But if you had to give an elevator pitch on that human being, you'd probably be, they're a Republican. They're a Democrat. And they're a libertarian. Like, that would be the thing. I don't think I don't know anybody in my life where the elevator pitch would be, oh, they're a Pats fan. And that's
I,
and that's crazy to me. Like, you're opening my
I literally
eyes
thought
to.
of somebody immediately the second you said that, and like, hey, Sean, but like, yeah, there's, I, I'm sorry to break the news to you, man, but there are some people out there that take their sports team so seriously that that's really kind of all they do with their lives. Is like when they're not in season with their sports team, they're doing out of season, is prepping for the next season to be with their sports team. It's those guys out there that talk about how we did this and we did that, and it's like, oh, are you on the team? And like, I don't mean to like be a shithead about it, but it's that idea that they consider themselves that, right? Like they talk about themselves as that. We I mean, like, it's like the Jimmy Fallon movie there that he made about the
Fever
Sox,
Pitch
Fever Pitch,
that
which is
he
fucking
made
episode
about the
remake
Sox.
about
It's,
soccer.
first of all, it is a Farrelly Brothers film. Second of all, it's a Nick Hornby novel. Like, it's not an original thing that Jimmy Fallon created. But I get where
Yes,
you're
but the
coming
Nick
from.
Hornby novel is not about the Red
That's
Sox.
true.
And
It's about
don't get the Red
football.
Sox. Yeah, exactly. Like, there's a lot of Jimmy Fallon in that movie, if you didn't know, Devin. like the fact
I'm
that,
focused on Drew Barrymore for obvious
um,
reasons.
so
I
like,
too have never been kissed. Uh,
but like, where he has season tickets, and that like when it's not in season again, like it's all about like talking about the prep for the next season, maybe doing fantasy football nowadays or fantasy baseball nowadays, that kind of stuff. Like there are people out there that sports is their identity. I didn't realize we were going to have the birds and the bees talk about this today
I
because
don't
like
think what I'm trying to say is I don't think I needed that. I am declaring that I don't know anybody like that. So it becomes a sort of alien concept on a real fundamental water is wet sort of level of understanding.
hmm
That's it. That's all I'm trying to say. And I played sports. It's not like I've never interacted with the stereotypical jock from high school. It's just I've never known somebody whose identity is just sport. It makes sense that they exist. I understand that they exist. We're putting an end to this conversation because at this point I'm just repeating myself. But it's one of those situations. I've met people who Star Wars is it. Star Wars is their identity. But I haven't met anybody like Jimmy Fallon's character in Fever Pitch is probably the closest that I've ever gotten.
I mean, Friday Night Lights was definitely fiction, but not fictional.
Yeah, Friday Night Lights is based on a biographical novel about a team.
Yes, more to my point. Like the ways that the parents and the coaches and the kids in that series and that football is life. Like that's not.
Right. I've never personally experienced that. That's all I'm saying. You don't need to keep giving me examples. I know it exists. I feel like this is what sports radio is. I feel like
I
that's what
guess
this
what it is for
sounds
me.
like.
No, I guess what it is for me is it is unfathomable to me that you've never met another human being in his life where they don't care about politics, they don't care about movies, they don't care about video games. What they care about is sports. I like that's just weird to me.
Yeah, that's it's weird to me too, CJ. That's why I
There's
bring it
like
up.
every other cartoon show on Nickelodeon is that like it's
I just that's the thing. Is it's so strange to me. I've never had to actually identify the fact that, oh wow, no, I don't really know anybody like that. And it's just something. The other
you're in
nice
theater.
thing is what's that?
I said, you're in theater.
Don't remind me. There was a Jeopardy thing that was a bunch of theater stuff, and I got every question right, and I'm just like, ugh, why? Why is this in my mind? Why is this something that I have? And then I was disappointed by the final Jeopardy that happened before the weekend, before we recorded, because it was about Chekhov's gun, and the one guy wrote Ibsen as the answer. And I'm like, you've never read an Ibsen play in your life if you think that he would ever come up with something like Chekhov's gun. And then I'm just like, why do I have that knowledge in my head? I guess I also don't want to, I personally don't like to qualify people as the one thing that they like. And it makes me sad that there are people that I point to and I'm like, Star Wars fan. But
Yeah,
I
mean, it's different
like,
though when they invite it on themselves, right?
Yeah.
When they introduce themselves as the Star Wars guy, and they get pissy when other people in the group suddenly have a piece of knowledge that they don't know about Star Wars, like that guy, right?
Yeah, I know that guy. I think I know the guy you're talking about.
Well, right. So, like, you know,
Yeah, I don't
it's
know.
just take that and apply that to the Bengals, and you get basically everybody I work with from the Cincinnati office.
Well, see, that's the thing. I also tend not to work in office settings with other people. I've worked in offices for at least the last 10 years of my life, but usually I'm alone in a little room, and I don't interact with other people. Probably because I'm fearful of meeting a bunch of rabid Cincinnati Bengals fans.
That's it, yeah.
The other nice thing is, I also could have said that LA won and still dedicated this whole thing to Mark, because regularly we would watch the documentary about the LA Raiders from the 30 for 30 series. Like, yeah, there's nothing on TV. Let's just throw that on. We watched that so many times. It's good. It's very good. Check that one out. I guess last thing I want to talk about Super Bowl, and telling you right now that it hasn't happened yet, and I also said it one more time than I think we're legally allowed, but don't sue us, NFL. We have no money. Is how do you feel about the halftime show? Do you have thoughts about Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Mary J. Blige, Kendrick Lamar, and Eminem being the performers?
I guess the thing for me is I have completely divorced the halftime show from the game for my entire life, because
Well, yeah.
I have never been hugely into football. Like, you know, definitely followed the Pats because my family followed the Pats. We'll definitely watch a game if it's on. I'll watch, I'll sit at a bar and watch a football game. I know tentatively what's happening on screen, right? But like, so this idea that I would somehow, I don't know, be offended in any way or like feel like, oh, this doesn't seem to fit the vibe is really weird to me, because like halftime shows never have and always do. It's just, so I mean, to me, it just sounds like it's going to be a fucking rad ass concert for 15 minutes. So like, I'm all for it. I don't know. Like, are there some people out there that are not about it?
I just feel like there's a lot of people who are questioning them as the halftime performers, and there's been a lot of, I think it's going to suck, I think it's going to be lame, who are these people, I don't know these things. Like, I just feel it's been a minefield of, I don't want to talk about sports in general right now because of just how much mental gymnastics you have to go through in order to enjoy them. Like, I had on the Olympics a little bit, and it was the big jump competition. Yeah, and I mean, like, so it's the first year of that, and I got wrapped into it. It had just been on while I was waiting for something else to start. The New American Dad, we're 4 episodes in. It's been fantastic so far. You know I love American Dad, but I wanted to wait. It started at 10, and I just had, like, time to kill, and I didn't want to get invested in anything. And then, lo and behold, I'm invested in the big jump, and I end up watching that until 11:30, and then having to go back and watch American Dad afterwards. And so, like, that type of stuff, it can capture you, but you know, it's set at Wow Gang, which is a former steel processing facility. So that's in the background, instead of beautiful mountains and everything, are cooling towers. and everybody is talking about, can't believe that they're performing at a former former nuclear power plant. Which, like, they're right there. If it's ever curious in popular culture, the greatest effect on our own culture that The Simpsons had, it was convincing the world that cooling towers only exist at nuclear power facilities.
I mean, are they incorrect? Is it not a nuclear facility?
It's a former steel mill, so they're just cooling towers for, the steel that they were refining.
That's amazing. That's such a game.
But everybody, like, it seems so strange that they would do this. Like, I guess it's nice that they were able to find another function for it, but is it safe for the competitors? And it's like, yeah, it's pretty safe for the competitors because there was never nuclear materials on that site, unless, I don't know what your thoughts about steel are.
Yeah. I mean, there's other things going on to complain about. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that's
like,
the thing.
What a weird thing to get caught on when there's definitive stuff out there that we can maybe rip into, huh?
Yeah, but that's the thing. I'm like, even that is something that I have to get over. But it is because of The Simpsons. Like Fall River, there used to be a power plant right by the Braga Bridge, and everybody would like, I love that nuclear power facility, and they just knocked down the cooling towers that were there, and people were like, what's going to happen to the radioactive materials that were there? And the conversation, like, even my father brought that up with me, what's going to happen? I can't believe they're knocking them down. And I'm like, well, it was a coal burning power plant, so it's going to be fine. There were never radioactive materials there. No, but the cooling towers, those are like the ones that nuclear power plants, like, they're actually just at any major facility
that has to cool a
lot of material. Like, that's why they're called cooling towers and not nuclear cooling towers. They're universal. They exist at a lot of facilities, but, people see them, and because of The Simpsons and that iconic look of the Springfield nuclear power plant, everybody thinks that a cooling tower is akin to a nuclear facility.
Yeah.
And it's just, okay, I guess. I mean, and that's the thing. The Simpsons has put a lot of marks on our culture, but convincing the world that a cooling tower automatically equals nuclear power is probably the most prevalent and kind of the most destructive to just enjoying day-to-day life.
It doesn't hurt that throughout all of pop culture, the establishing shot of anything having to do with Chernobyl or 3 Mile Isle is also that.
It's also
like,
cool.
You're not wrong about The Simpsons. Like, that is definitely the most prevalent after what, 30 something years.
I think, the 33rd season right now.
It literally being in the opening shot of every episode. So, like, yes, definitely that. But, like, the rest of the culture is not doing any favors there.
Yeah, but is the rest of culture only going along with that, using those because of how immediately identifiable those cooling towers are as a nuclear power plant in The Simpsons?
Oh, yes, because if you look back even before The Simpsons even existed, anything that involved a nuclear facility would definitely have a giant tower in the middle of it because
they need it in order to...
right, and also because they actually exist there, but like in terms of like, oh my god, this facility's gonna blow type stuff, Yeah,
I don't know. It was so strange. All of the talk about, I can't believe that they're doing this at a former nuclear site. I'm like, it's really not, and it's really not difficult to find the proof of that. And I mean, not just the proof on like some Chinese website where it would clearly be propaganda to try to like redirect it. I don't know. It's just been weird. But any type of sports right now, I have to do a lot of mental gymnastics in order to find enjoyment from them because of just everything else that is going on.
Yep.
And I don't know. I don't know why I'm so focused on this right now. I guess it's because the Super Bowl, weirdly, especially in terms of Sejan and I, is an important event. Because I remember that Super Bowl, the 2006 Super Bowl, where the Patriots could have had a perfect season and they lost.
And they wished it.
The man by my side that entire night was Sejan. And it just sort of galvanized it. So it makes me weirdly nostalgic for our own friendship in addition to everything else that's going on.
Yeah. I mean, it's that thing about the Super Bowl that I think is really important. It transcends the idea of sports and all that sort of stuff anyway. It transcends the NFL at this point because like you're saying, like there's not really a desire to be involved because of all of this weird shit going on. But there's still this desire to have that like that marker in time that we know that we're gonna do a thing together, right? And so I think that's the other thing about the halftime show stuff for me is it's also benefited me in a lot of ways that I've been able to kind of like completely divorce myself from the game by saying I only stick around for the ads and the halftime show. And like, yeah, I get it. Like I'm gonna catch some of the game in there, and also that money is also going to the NFL and all of that other stuff. I understand all of that. It's just that it is one more level of disassociation from football to not actually even be worried about like the game or the teams or any of that stuff, right? So there's just they do this on purpose. They do so much work to make sure that they're catching the other side of the coin with the halftime show and the ads and all that stuff for the Super Bowl that it makes it worth it for somebody that doesn't even like football or follow football, right? And it becomes that event and it becomes that thing that becomes nostalgic because it happens every year. I mean, it is the NFL's Christmas, right? Like it is that idea that this is the thing that brings everybody together to sit by the warm glow of their television and watch sports, right? And it's easy to get caught up in that, and whether you're a football fan or not.
Yeah, I guess, but also I have no intention to watch this year, and I know that, and that feels strange to me in the fact that like my parents are not around. If my father was here, no matter what, that's what would be on the TV. But
Yeah.
I'm just like, I don't really care about these teams. I really haven't watched any of this season. There's no investment from me, and the
Yeah.
only thing that might get me to my TV is that halftime show, which
Yep.
is why it's even crazier to me that everybody's like, what a bad choice. Especially when you consider, like, those are the voices of West Coast rap. So why wouldn't it be, like,
In
kind of
LA, yeah.
impressive to have them be the halftime show in an LA stadium?
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
you're going to LA, you're celebrating the culture of that area, and like, granted, where in the state they are and things like that is a little, well, they're not going to go out and just get a local nobody band to play, unfortunately, right? Like they're going to get the big names, and like, of course, they're going to get names like Snoop and Dre and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, like I think what it is anybody out there that's currently talking about the halftime show is probably somebody that is more invested in the game than us.
Yeah.
And so, like, guess what, guys? I'm sorry you don't like it, but it's really not for you. Like, the way that they plan these halftime shows and the way that they plan these ads and all of this stuff is to draw in all these people they wouldn't otherwise get for football.
Yeah.
So, like, you've got the football game. This one's for me.
You have the other 4 hours of this. I'm asking for 15 minutes.
Well, and that's it is completely marketing. That is the business side of why they kind of don't care that you don't like the halftime show, guys. Because again, it's not for you. If it was for you, they'd be getting like probably like a marching band or something. Because like the nostalgia factor for football fans, for let's face it, high school football is really where it starts, right? Like that's what, like, so if it was really for the football fan out there, no, it wouldn't be a rap show. You're right. It would be something else entirely.
Well, I don't know. I just recall when it was Coldplay a couple of years ago and the way that they saved that because everybody was like, who the fuck is Coldplay? Myself included, even as somebody who knows who Chris Martin is, who the fuck is Coldplay? And they're like, oh, we'll bring in Bruno Mars and we'll bring in Beyonce to perform. And a lot of people don't
Do you
remember.
really not remember Coldplay?
No. Here's my first exposure to Coldplay. No, I know who Coldplay is. I'm just being a jerk. But my first exposure to Coldplay was a regional theater festival where on the back of all of our name tags, because they gave us name tags to promote getting to know each other, they had written a band name. So for any group activities, that was your team, and that was who you're supposed to go with. And I had Coldplay on the back of mine. And looking at it, I'm like, who the fuck is Coldplay? I work in music, and I don't know who this band is.
Well, you were all wearing yellow, so it made sense.
Yeah, right? It was all yellow. Clocks. But yeah, that's just why it is. So I always kind of laugh about it. And then it was really interesting where after Coldplay had done some things and Chris Martin had been married to Gwyneth Paltrow, the reaction to them playing the Super Bowl was still, who the fuck is Coldplay? And my favorite part of it all was them being like, Bruno Mars will save us. When Bruno Mars had done the halftime show, I want to say it was like 8 years earlier, there was so much fear about like, who's Bruno Mars? Can Bruno Mars actually do a Super Bowl halftime show and make people happy? And it being one of the best received halftime shows in such a long time.
Well, that's the other crazy thing about throwing shade at anybody like Dre or Snoop or even Eminem, right?
Yeah.
Is or like, and for the record, this is the first time I'm hearing that these are the guys playing the halftime show. I want
Good,
to put
I'm
that
glad.
out there. But the idea being that you could somehow be offended that they're going to be the entertainers, like, these guys play 20, 30, 50,000 people stadiums on a regular basis. Like, Dre doesn't get out of bed anymore unless he's going to a facility that houses at least 30,000 people. like why, like, he doesn't have to do live music if he doesn't want to. So, like, don't worry, guys. It's going to be a hell of a show. You might not like the music, but I almost would venture to say that if anyone in LA rap was going to bring people together, people that don't necessarily listen to LA rap, it's going to be these guys.
Yeah, and I mean, there's that little part of me that's just holding out that maybe Cube will show up. Maybe. I mean, it would
Yeah.
be cool. I doubt it, but it'd be just one of those situations where, like, as soon as I heard Dre and Snoop Dogg, I'm like, all right, so that makes sense. Like, those are the guys. They have enough songs that even if you're not a fan, you can identify them. The question is, the thing that I've always posited is that for a Super Bowl halftime show, you need a band that has at least 3 recognizable songs.
Okay, yeah.
Like that anybody, if you name that band, they can be like, the Rolling Stones, yeah, well, they got Shelter, they got Under My Thumb, and these are not good Rolling Stones songs. I chose the wrong band for this example, but I didn't want to be the Beatles because we're already kind of dancing on the legality space, and I'm pretty sure saying the name of any Beatles song gets you sued these days.
At least gets Paul McCartney's attention.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe we want Paul McCartney less. Come on, Jump. This is by Jet.
Hey, man.
Wings.
I mean, Paul McCartney is no slouch. I think he's done a halftime show.
Yeah, he has. Yes, it's what it makes sense. But when I heard Dre and Snoop, I'm like, okay, so even if Dre doesn't have like one immediately recognizable song as just Dr. Dre, and that's not the case, you bring in Snoop Dogg, everybody knows Gin and Juice. Everybody knows Gin and Juice.
Yeah.
And then you look at the other people, it's like everybody knows a Kendrick Lamar song. Everybody knows probably a Mary J. Blige song. And honestly, the one who really sort of satisfies the you need to know 3 of this artist's songs is Eminem.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, he's Detroit. I understand that he's not like West Coast, but Detroit is very close to Cincinnati.
No, I mean, in a weird way, right? But he's also Jay's protege. So, like, at the end of the day, he's very much been adopted by West Coast mentality and things like that. Yeah, like, it's, I don't know. It seems like it's going to be a hell of a halftime show, and like I got no problem with it. Here's the thing: so I did get invited to a Super Bowl party, and I am going to one later today. So I will be going to see like family and stuff like that for like the first time in a while, right? And so we're using the Super Bowl as a reason to do so. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you better believe that I'm probably going to sit in the kitchen for most of the game. But that halftime show comes on, I'll be the only one sitting in front of the TV. Everybody else will be in the kitchen.
Yeah,
whatever.
That's fine. That sounds like the way to do. I don't even know. I mean, I enjoy football. I feel like I'm being rude to it. It's been hard to watch it in the whole COVID-19 atmosphere because of the danger there and everything else that we're finding out too about how they're just the worst organization. Like, we knew the NFL was pretty bad before, but now the things that are being revealed because of the scrutiny that they can be put under in the pandemic environment, it really is just kind of disgusting. Like the racism and the outright just ignoring mental and physical health issues with players.
Yeah, I think what it is like, you know, for a while there, the big thing that we were slowly starting to kind of get a look into is all of the concussion stuff, right? Yeah. Like that really kind of started cracking that door open for people to start looking inside and saying, hey, maybe they aren't doing everything they can to take care of people. And then what COVID did is just kind of fast tracked that entire fucking scandal and like blew it up. And this idea being that like, okay, now we've got the opportunity to really kind of consider this. And I think we've talked about this before. hours. COVID also gave everybody kind of the ability to kind of just focus on things that were not like work and stuff like that. And so suddenly you started really considering the things in your life. First on one side, a lot of people really got into D&D because they remembered how much they loved it. On the other side, people started really looking at the sports teams they were following and really started questioning a lot of the material they were taking in. Like it happened across the board. It happened in movies, it happened in video games, it happened in music. The ways in which we consume culture has changed drastically in the last 3 years. And part of that, like one symptom of that, is the fact that like we kind of got a front row seat to something in the NFL that we normally don't get to see because it's usually behind closed doors. Because all of this stuff about like, are they going to institute regulations? How are they going to adhere to them? Are they going to find people that don't? Oh, they're not. They're just going to let people get away after all this. Oh, Aaron Rodgers is going to lie to the entire organization. And
Aaron Rodgers won an NFL honor this past week.
Oh my God!
Like I Super Bowl of the year, and I'm just like, oh, okay. That I guess we just ignore the fact that he just outright lied and broke a bunch of your rules.
And the lying is not even the worst part. He put people in danger. Period.
Right.
Like I firmly stand behind the concept that what he did endangered people around him in the organization, and they basically spat in the eye of all of the people. They might as well have had Aaron Rodgers spit in their eye because he basically was doing that in front of everyone for months and getting away with it, and they just didn't do anything about it. And I think that that's one of the biggest egregious parts about a lot of what we've learned about the NFL is not just that all of this horrendous stuff happens within it, but the fact that it always seems to go unpunished is just crazy to me.
Yeah. I do not disagree, especially like the unpunished start of it. They put in all these rules saying that if you have COVID, this is what's going to happen. You'll have to forfeit the game if you don't adhere to these protocols. And then nothing came of those. Even as we heard of violations of those protocols, they didn't stick to them. It was essentially a parent saying, you can't do this if you do that. And then when you do that, them not punishing you.
There's not even like a sacrificial lamb I can think of. There isn't anybody that they like put out there to be like, see, we're being serious. Like they just didn't even bother. They didn't even try to pretend. Maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe there is one or two cases where they actually did something, but from my recollection, I mean, obviously whatever it was didn't stick.
I mean, nothing jumps to mind, but again, I've been sort of removing myself from that situation because of how it makes me feel. Yeah. It's supposed to be an escape, and when your escapism becomes just as bad or worse than what you're escaping from, you look for some other type of escapism.
Yeah.
All right. I think that completes the sports section of this episode of the Say Report. There are so many other things I'd like to talk about. And a pretty solid segue, I guess, would be sports plus movie equals entertainment.
Yeah.
Double thumbs up.
I was going to say, I don't think we're quite done with
sports. Well, Sijan, in my defense, I was hoping to transition into home team back when I said we're making biopics about it now.
No, I know, but we had more important shit to talk
we're
about.
more important things to talk about. I'm glad to have gotten all that out of my system so that maybe I can enjoy the Super Bowl tonight.
Well, I think that, okay, so I think hand in hand with the Super Bowl coming out this week, like when did home team drop?
Home team dropped the 28th, January 28th.
So the latest Happy Madison Netflix collaboration dropped, and that is Home Team, which for anyone that doesn't know is actually a biopic of Peyton. What's his name?
Sean Payton.
Sean Payton. Yeah.
The head coach for the New Orleans Saints.
The thing is like, okay, so yes, it's a biopic of Sean Payton. Weird already because we're talking about it being a Happy Madison production, and it truly is. It's a full on one, starring Kevin James. I mean, you've got all of the
Alan Colbert shows up. That's all that I need for it to be a for real Happy Madison.
I mean, like
production.
there was a straight up moment where I was like, should we maybe be doing this for the other show? Like there was a hot second, but we'll talk more about it on that show. But the idea being that like it is a full on like Sandler-esque style film, just also happens to be about this guy and this very particular point in his life. For anyone that doesn't know, Sean Payton was the head of the St. Louis Rams, and they were St. Louis, right?
They were the New Orleans Saints.
New Orleans Saints. Sorry, Jesus, got the.
You
Rams
just got St. Louis and the Rams on the mind. It's fine.
It was the Saints in St. Louis that I was getting
Yeah.
caught up on. But yeah, he was the head of the Saints who back in 2012, I think it was,
Yeah.
they got caught in a pretty heinous scandal in the NFL where it turns out that one of the coaches, I think for the defensive team, was the main player, but a bunch of people in the organization were involved in accepting bribes to basically take out other players on other
So it
teams.
was
So
bountying, really, is what
yeah,
it comes down to.
it was definitely bounties. Like people were coming to them and paying them upwards of five, six, $7,000 to take out major players on other teams in their defense strategy. A couple of guys on the offensive side also kind of maybe got caught up in it. Problem is that we'll never know everything because they keep it all under lock and key. And on top of that, I don't think they ever figured out everything about it because it was such a crazy ass network of payments and people and contacts and players that like kind of was mind-blowing how many people had been involved and how long it had been going on. And at the center of everything is Sean Payton, who is the coach of the team. And to pretend that he didn't know what was going on, he tried it and it didn't work. So then he had to start playing the, well, I wasn't involved in all of it card. And that didn't quite land either. So he ends up taking some heat for it and ends up being suspended for a year. And in that year, he decides this is real.
This is all real. Everything that he's about to say is real.
It's only a peewee team, right? It's not even like a
it's peewee football.
Yeah, so he ends up deciding to coach his son's peewee league back in Texas, and this is what this movie is about: is that year of him coaching his son's team. And it's just such a bizarre topic to apply the Sandler formula to, just because like it's not a heartwarming situation. And and I think that like they try in the movie to really kind of lean into some of the more dramatic stuff. It's definitely one of the more, if not the most, like dramatically attempted Sandler Happy Madison production that I've seen in a long while. Like the ways in which there are moments where they address issues, not the issue, but issues, are definitely more often and hit harder than they do in, say, like a Billy Madison or a Little Nicky, right?
Yeah, I can agree with that statement. It's a very true statement. It's just the weirdest thing about this movie for me, the weirdest thing about Home Team for me. First of all, kudos to everybody who's in the film. I'm not judging anybody. Everybody gave 100% for the roles that they were playing, and I want to give the credit there. The issue is, at the heart of it, you have Sean Payton, who has a year suspension for, and it really was, as Sejan said, so wrapped up in everything that there was really no one person that they could make culpable for what it did. So the NFL's main decision was, so we're just going to hold the head coach accountable, because we don't have. To
be clear, I don't think they could have done more. I think that's the important part of this, is they decided, oh, this web is too weavy. They're like, we're not getting into this, was essentially their thing. And everybody's like, guys, it's your fucking job to get into this.
It's your job to do it. You should
It is
really.
Goodell this time, right? Like this
it is Goodell. Yeah, it's Roger Goodell.
Yeah, fucking of course it is. Yeah. So like he's just like, rather than waste all of this time and money to figure out who's actually responsible, we're just gonna slap this guy on the wrist. And the movie makes it seem like it's this really dramatic thing that he doesn't get like the appeal and get to come back halfway through the season and stuff like this. But like we all know, and it's pretty much on the table in the movie, that he's going to come back at least next season.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so you don't get to come back in 6 months. You have to wait 12. And like, that's supposed to be like the like hard punch in the gut feeling he gets when he gets that phone call at that moment. And I'm just like, fuck off. Like,
yeah.
And it, I don't know.
But it was an unprecedented sort of punishment at the time, because the punishment wasn't just you're retired from coaching. It was literally, you cannot interact with the organization at all under penalty of fines or incarceration. Like, it was nuts, the type of punishment, because like usually if someone gets a suspension like that, they're like, all right, so they can't be at the games, they can't be on the field, but they would still like sort of get to have their finger in the pot, so that when they come back a year later, that the whole apple cart doesn't need to be rebuilt.
Right.
But the fact that like, no, you are done. And there's a time where he calls the organization. They're like, no, I could get fired for talking to you. And
Right.
it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And it's so strange. Like, it's such a weird thing for that. Like, it's definitely the stuff of biopics, but not the comedy Happy Madison biopic. But
Yeah, and this movie is also that. It's not Happy Madison trying to do a dramatic movie and not succeeding. They are also trying to turn this into. I mean, like there's a 10-minute scene of people just vomiting everywhere. Like and it's every character in the movie ends up doing it at some point. So make no mistake. This is an Adam Sandler style like family comedy movie, right? It's just that they just also want to like tell this dramatic sports story. Do you know much about the background on it, like where it comes from?
where the movie comes
Yeah,
from?
where the movie comes from.
No, 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 no.
So Taylor Lautner is literally on the set of like Twilight, the doubles,
Breaking
the
Dawn
movie.
Part 1 and 2.
Yeah, the one that they split in half. So she's on like the last movie, but they're working like crazy, and they filmed a bunch of it in New Orleans, right? There's entire moments of that movie that take place down in New Orleans. Sorry, that's the only part of that movie that I enjoy because it introduces the greatest character in that series, and it's Lee Pace, who is just phenomenal. Because after all of the shit that you see for 3 movies, his character shows up and he's like, "So why we ain't just eating people?" And you're like, what?" And he's like, "Because we're vampires. Let's just eat some people." And you're just like, "Fuck yeah, man!" Like it's amazing. He's like the only believable vampire in the entire series, and he's basically just True Blood. But they yeah, so he's down filming that, and Sean Payton decides, he's got a bunch of pull as the head of the, I'm just gonna say St. Louis Rams again, of the Saints. He gets on set with his daughter to like show her Twilight and all that, and his daughter Lautner ends up kind of connecting with Peyton, but his daughter ends up connecting with I think like a writer on the movie or something like that. And they end up, like, as far as I can tell, still together. I don't know, married maybe, I don't know. But the boyfriend, the husband, whoever it is that she meets, becomes so enamored with Sean Payton, and Lautner becomes so enamored with him that he writes this movie for him. And like Lautner like really kind of oversees getting this movie made, and is the reason that he is able to go to Happy Madison. Because Lautner, for anybody that doesn't know, and we haven't quite even gotten to him yet in the Sandlerverse, but the idea being that like he shows up on Ridiculous Six and is in a couple of other, I think he's in Grown Ups 2 or something. Like, yeah, he shows up in somewhere else along the line and has become really close with the Sandler crew. So that is the connection. Like, Taylor Lautner is the reason this movie gets made this way, because like he's the one that kind of gets in with Sean Payton. He's the one that introduces like Sean Payton's daughter to the guy that ends up writing this movie for him, and is like all about him. So like the other thing about this movie is it is so clearly a puff piece about Payton, and it is so clearly a love letter to him, to the point where he shows up at the end and like has some just like fucked line about how he's like, "Yeah, we sucked without you," and it's just like like to himself, like just like fuck off. Like, this movie is just so like on his ass, like just loves this guy. That, I mean, the thing, like, I don't know if I made this very clear. The bounty scandal to me is one of the most heinous kind of scandals in the NFL, because it wasn't even about like cheating to win, and cheating to win's not good either. Like, I'm not condoning that in any way. That's fucked as well. This is just, to me, fucked in a whole different way, because it's literally just about money. They weren't hurting other members of teams because they were then going to be able to like win the game against them. They literally were taking money from anybody out there that wanted to just see somebody get injured. Obviously, more than likely other teams and other players and other shit like that, but also like apparently just like random emails with just randos that just had $5,000 cash lying around. Like, if they were like, say, the owner of a large company in, say, Pittsburgh, and they wanted to see somebody because they wanted the Steelers to win next week, like, they could apparently get in touch with somebody down in New Orleans and find one of the Saints to like break their leg the week before, like that kind of shit.
Yeah, it is, you're not wrong. It is super despicable. The whole bounty system is...
Yeah, this guy is just like, to make him like the hero of your movie is just so weird to me.
Dude, the weirdest thing about it is he is supposed to be the hero of this film, but he feels like a villain pretty much the entire movie. Like, it gets to that point where like he's pushing the kids too hard, and he's benching people. It's sort of like a reverse Mighty Ducks. If Gordon Bombay started with nice intentions, but then by the end he was like, "Fuck them kids."
Yeah, I mean, they try to do this whole element where when he first shows up, he tries really hard to not like let his own personality get involved, but obviously the game becomes so much that he can't stop himself, and he has a turnabout in the middle of the last game and all this sort of stuff. It is structured like you would expect this movie to be structured, and does exactly what you expect it to do. It is so tropey and on the nose, like. I mean, it still plucks at heartstrings in a lot of ways and still like works as a movie. It's just like the second you start thinking about it in any real life context, it's just fucked up.
Yeah,
Like it's
it
just
doesn't
weirdly
work.
fucked up.
it's it's really one of those situations where Tyler Lautner's coach Trey goes to him to be like, "Hey, do you want to be my assistant coach?" It's like, why would you do that? Why would you invite that negativity to your team unless like you know what you're getting from it? He
Yeah.
seems so surprised when Peyton's like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna run laps and we're gonna do this." And he's like, "Oh, you're pushing the kids a little hard, aren't you?" And he's like, "Am I? Am I pushing the kids hard?" And it's like, yeah, of course he is. He's used to working with grown men who play
Yeah.
this sport.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's what you asked him to do when you asked him to join your team in this position.
Yeah, it strikes me as the kind of movie, biopic movie that we're gonna find out in 10 years. There's gonna be like a hardcore one made, and we're gonna learn a lot more shit about like how he like weaseled his way into this position because he just needed to be doing something, and it was never about like helping his son, but instead just about like staying relevant. Because the other thing is that like it's in Texas, and even Pee Wee football is worth the news if something crazy is going on in it. And lo and behold, Sean Payton coaching Pee Wee football in his suspension season is just enough for at least people in the local area, if not at the state of Texas, to be paying attention. So like it 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 reeks of this idea that like this movie is not telling you everything. You know that every step of the way. You know that there's these moments where he gets asked to coach and you're like, it wasn't that easy. Somebody didn't just think, "Oh shit, it'd be great if he coached his Pee Wee team," and he went to him and he just said yes. Because that's the other thing, is there's so little controversy in way of like not the game. Like the only controversy in this movie is that are they or are they not going to win the championship, which is for a fictional sports team movie perfectly fine. That's the joy. Or if it is this idea of this underdog team overcoming it. But like it's not that movie because he's not the underdog who's overcoming some type of like some type of hill that he has to like overcome. He is literally the top dog, and you just find out that he's just an asshole and he needs to stop being one. But again, it's never implied that he needs to learn to be this in order to get back. Like there's nobody that ever says to him like you can't come coach again until you learn to be a better person. They're only ever saying to him you can't coach this season.
This season. And
And
for so much of the movie, he is convinced that he's going to be able to appeal it. So much of the movie is him thinking, this is nothing. Like, what happened to me and the way that they punished me, I'm going to appeal the decision. I'm still going to be coaching. And that takes any emotional weight out of anything that's going
yeah,
on.
yeah,
The
there's
appeal
no stakes
process
in this
of it
movie.
is just
Yeah.
like, well, I know it didn't happen. I know that he still was suspended for that 1 year from the Saints because it was all anybody could kind of talk about was the fact that, oh, is the NFL going to start being more culpable for these things that are clearly going on? It's just that the Saints got caught doing it. Because bountying wasn't new. We
Yes.
knew to call it bountying. It's just the fact that the Saints sort of acted like they were too big to fail with it. And on a lot of levels, they kind of did it. Like it was Goodell being like, we'll just punish Sean Payton then because it happened in his house. And the thought process from Sean Payton was, it was in my house, but I didn't know what was going on. That was the line that he stuck to. So how can I be held accountable when something was happening and I had no knowledge of it? He was so convinced that it was going to appeal that decision that
Yeah.
for so much of this movie to happen the way that it happens, like, okay, like we know what's going to happen here. It's so bananas. This movie is so crazy. And even then, he only missed like one game by the time that the appeal would have gone through.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like he was missing preseason games, and they're like, "Oh, it's got to be hard not coaching." And I'm like, Probably not for preseason stuff, but when the actual season starts, yeah, he had like a 1 game suspension before the appeal process happens. But then, no, it didn't happen. And then he can't right the ship. He has to watch for this whole year. But I guess it's okay because he's fixing the relationship with his son. But is he? Because the story's not about the kids. That's
really
the
not.
weirdest thing about this movie.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that this, based on the true story of Sean Payton's suspension movie, doesn't have the kids as the main character, but it then tries to have its cake and eat it too by giving you that Mighty Ducks, that Little Giants, that big green sort of feeling about these kids overcoming.
Yeah.
But no, because at the end of the day, the adversity that those children are overcoming is Sean Payton kind of being an asshole.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what it is the underdog kids sports comedy is just the veneer to make a puff piece about Peyton. Like that is without a doubt to me the plan going into making this movie, and the inevitable thing that ends up on film, and the way that you're gonna just have to read this film and going forward. Like there's no denying that that's what it is, right? And so there's this element to it where I think there's probably people out there where this movie is going to be gangbusters for them, because some of the conversation we were having earlier in the episode, where there are people out there that like define themselves by this stuff. Part of that mentality is dying on the hill of controversy, where like they just want to be on the other side of that argument. They need to be, because they've defined themselves for so long by this team, by this character, by this person, that like they just need to kind of like, they need to believe that this kind of movie is the reality, right? And so I do think there is an audience for this film. I don't think you or I are in it. I don't think there's a lot of people that are in it.
My father is not in the audience for this film.
I just think
my father fell asleep, and he is the closest person to someone I would say is defined by sport.
Well, and I don't even mean like it has to be somebody that's defined by sport. I mean like anybody out there that's defined by the Saints, right?
Yeah.
Like that idea being like, and like they had won the Super Bowl in 2010, and it was like a huge deal for them. Like, and that's part of the reason why he feels like he's untouchable at this moment in his career. And the movie doesn't go far enough to explain that the reason he thinks he's untouchable is because he wasn't involved. It's literally because he thinks he's too powerful, right? And that's the real kind of killer about the whole thing with the appeal process, is the movie really makes it seem like he's fighting the good fight and losing, and like that's not what's happening in those moments.
Not at all.
Like he's convinced that because he is the guy that brought them the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and because he is who he is, he should be able to get away with this, and he doesn't. So like, and that's not ever the intention of this movie, though. So I'm saying, there is a very niche audience in this world that this movie is meant for, on top of everything that like I just to add to the weirdness of the whole thing.
Yeah. Understand that me discussing what his defense is going to be is in no way an endorsement of that defense.
Yeah.
That's just, that was, he's like, I'm Sean Payton, I didn't know anything about it.
Well, and like the other thing about that defense that we should also point out is like that's the defense that everybody in the NFL goes with. The NFL, the systems in place in which people are held accountable in the NFL, and this is one of the things that we have discovered over the last few years that we've kind of all started to question, is it is such a weird network of who's in charge of who and why certain rules are able to be applied to certain people and not other, and like all of this stuff. It is purposely made that way so that people can get away with murder, right? So that idea being that like the system is convoluted and fucked up, and the reason that like things will happen and we'll say, why doesn't this person ever get punished for this sort of stuff, is the system is in place to completely muddy the waters to the point where they quote unquote can't punish everyone, even though maybe they should sometimes, right? And that idea being that like this movie just ignores that too. It's really wild to me, because if anything, if you love Sean Payton and you love the Saints, then this movie is going to give you like a big old boost and be like, yeah, if you're anyone else, all this movie should do is make you realize how fucking how fucked the system is. That, I mean, this is literally a propaganda piece for the NFL.
Yeah. No denying it. I mean, look back at something like Deflategate, and the fact that the whole argument was Bill Belichick being like, I didn't ask them to do it. I didn't
And then
ask for them to do it.
didn't they end up like blaming some like kid in the locker room? I say kid in the locker room, but like
It was a ball boy. It was a ball
yeah,
boy who they
but
ultimately put it on the heads of.
and they were just like this idea that he was in charge of getting the balls inflated, and like 9 out of the 10 for the game were, it was just this one, and they just happened to grab a bad one out of the thing, and like that whole shit. They tried blaming equipment, but in the end, it was that idea of just like, I can't be in charge of every little piece of this team. I'm the coach, or if you're or I'm the quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Like, but like, no, that's literally the description of your job. You don't get to play that card. I'm sorry.
A general is held accountable for his men.
Yeah.
Is just how it works, and it's how it has to work, right?
Yeah.
That's how the whole system of delegation works. Is you need to understand that the people you're delegating tasks to can complete those tasks. Otherwise, the problem is going to fall back on you.
And yeah, it's just so weird because this movie really starts from a place of wanting you to believe that this guy has somehow been wronged. Yeah. And like this is a redemption story of like him kind of picking himself up after, like we're supposed to believe that we're watching the Rocky 2 after like getting 5 minutes of Rocky 1 in this movie. And that's not what it is, because like you're not rooting for this guy. And if they wanted to really shine a light on like him being an asshole and learning not to be from working with children, like that's an interesting movie, and like we'll maybe see that, like I said, in like 10-15 years maybe somebody will do that kind of movie, and then we'll learn a lot more about how he maybe forced himself into certain positions in life that maybe that this movie kind of assumes the world just handed to him.
Yeah, I don't really know. It was weird, and it didn't leave me feeling satisfied after watching it, because you're not wrong, there has to be an audience for this film, and I was hoping that as what we do with the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe podcast, like a Happy Madison sort of like juvenile football underdog story with the veneer of the Sean Payton scandal would work for me as somebody who knows it. And I'm not gonna lie, it was such glee being like, oh look, it's Gary Valentine. That's Kevin James's brother. Oh look, Jackie Sandler, Rob Schneider, Jared Sandler as the hotel clerk. Like right. Those moments were super fun. Chris Farley, it was John Farley. John Farley showing up as a referee,
the ref at the end,
and Alan Covert. Yeah. Like Alan Covert, I was so sad with Alan Covert's Covert moment in that, because first of all, Alan Covert looks rough. I didn't realize how rough he looked.
He's doing fine.
He just looked rougher in that situation than in that. And and to me, it feels more like
covered in puke and rain. So
yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. I just feel like the pandemic has not been kind to Alan Covert. Is what went through my mind. And then puke and rain, and he's in the puke and rain scene. But there were just so many other moments where I'm like, man, that would have been. I wish Alan Covert had been one of the parents. Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, the angry guy on the side. Yeah. No, I mean, like, the movie, so, like, divorced from everything having to do with the NFL, right? Like, and this is something that I can only do in this moments with you, because otherwise I can't do that with this movie. And no one should do that with this movie. But, like, if we're going to have this conversation, let's do it right. Divorcing it from all of that, as a movie, elements are there that make this a more than mediocre film. I would give it as a film probably like a 7 out of 10. One of those ones that like I could definitely watch again at some point, but it's not any one that I'm gonna like force my friends and family to all sit down and watch with me. I'm not gonna get like majorly invested in making sure everyone sees it or any of that. And a lot of the Sandler Netflix films have kind of hit that. Only one or two have been ones where I've been like, oh, we should like I should go back and watch this again. We should watch Murder Mystery is my example of that, right? Where I'm just like, you guys want to have some fun tonight, like let's get drunk and watch Murder Mystery. This doesn't quite get there because of a lot of the stuff we're talking about, how there's no stakes, and there's a lot of these issues with like the ways in which characters kind of are treated. The kid's story is just kind of just there for moments of laugh and then like disappears. His relationship with his son like doesn't seem too hard for him to kind of get in and talking to him at first, then all of a sudden his son is mad at him again, then all of a sudden it's over again. So like that whole story is just kind of a mess too. But like, like I really like the moments with Rob Schneider as the stepdad, and like being like not hated by anyone in that family. Like they all seemed very invested in the idea that like he is the new, he's the new addition to the family, but also very much being the odd one out amongst all of
Oh
them
yeah.
and stuff like that. Like that those moments were interesting, and like, and in terms of what we've seen in terms of Sandler comedy and comedy in general, that wouldn't have been the case 5, 6 years ago. Like, right? He would have been the butt of many jokes and problematic, much more problematic ones
The
than in this
weird thing
movie.
is that he is clearly accepted, but he's still the butt of a bunch of jokes because he's so un-Texan.
Yeah, well, and so what it is it's the difference between mean comedy and kind comedy,
Yeah.
where like somebody still has to be the butt of the joke in kind comedy, but it can be like a loving ribbing. Like it doesn't have to be like ripping this character and everything that it represents to shreds, which is like kind of where you land with a lot of Schneider's earlier roles where like the characters he's playing are not people to root for or love in any way. Like he's always kind of the weird side character that really is just upsetting to be around. This is a Rob Schneider character I wouldn't mind hanging around sometimes, right? And by the way, by all accounts, from what I understand about Rob Schneider in his real life, this is also the closest I think to just actual Rob Schneider nowadays.
Oh yeah,
Apparently,
yeah,
getting into a
definitely.
lot of this stuff with like the meditation and incense stuff is very much on par with just him in general in the world. From what little I know about him as a person off screen. So like that's the other thing is like it also just feels like it's the first time we've seen Rob Schneider in a long time, just like acting and not trying to put on some offensive character. But that's just that is kind of par for the course for the rest of this movie, right? Is like an element kind of unexpectedly heartwarming and like fun being around, and there's a lot of really good moments with the kids, despite the fact that like it's never enough to establish them as anything more than just props for jokes and stuff like that. Like it's
Yeah.
just it's a perfectly serviceable film, but not good enough to in any way make up for the fact that it just kind of is just this horrendous puff piece for this terrible character, this terrible person that is in real life is terrible.
My big failure on the part of this movie is the fact that if I were a kid, I don't think I'd want to watch it over and over again
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
there's not enough kid stuff there. So it's not one of those movies for like that as an adult you can enjoy because look at how deep the storyline is in what can be enjoyed by children as well. And as a kid, you're like, there's not enough with the kids. The only thing that I kind of like is that their goal is to shut down the scoreboard, and they shut down the scoreboard in a moment out of the natural.
Yeah.
But I don't
I mean, I love it.
like.
No, I mean, it clearly an homage to the natural.
Yeah,
There's that old Hollywood, right? But that idea being that it's also they don't. I mean, spoiler alert for anyone that seems to want to see this movie even after us bashing on it for this long. But like the idea that they don't win, right, is really cool too. Like that whole aspect to it. But the fact that that doesn't ruin them, like
right.
they are able to have that celebration. There's a lot of really fun elements that make this movie watchable in a vacuum. The
Yeah.
problem is that there's no way to watch this movie in a vacuum. If there was ever a movie that has been affected by the culture around it, it's this sports biopic about this terrible person that this movie makes no effort to ever acknowledge what makes him terrible. Even the moments that they pretend to. In the beginning, when they first talk about it, and that moment when he's talking to his son, the only two times that I can think of where they really acknowledge this his son says to him, "Did you do it?" And he's like, "It's more complicated than that." And that's the whole
And
thing.
that's
That's
like,
all we
well,
get.
that's not a good argument. That's not what you want to tell your kid.
Yeah, it's just horrible. So like the movie, yeah, the movie is fine as a movie, but there's no way to not see it as anything more than just this horrendous piece of media that that is doing something that I just cannot agree with.
Oh, the final thing for me is those kids being okay, even though they've lost. It'd be one thing if that were a journey, but the first time that they score a touchdown, they're as excited about it. So it's
Mhm.
not like they learned some lesson about
Yeah.
it's okay if we're having fun, because that lesson is proven to be part of who these children are the first time that you meet them.
Yeah, they're already pretty chill kids,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah. I mean, and that's the other thing is like, yeah, like you're saying, there's no real character development in terms of them all getting along. They all love each other from the first moment. Even that moment when the kid gets made the quarterback. I just went into a really weird accent there.
It's
Sorry.
the quarterback.
But like even that moment where he's like, yeah, guys, suck it, and everybody's just like, dude, like we love you, but just don't be a douche. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, guys, I'll suck it. Like it's a funny moment, but all that does in that moment is establish that there's no animosity anywhere on this team amongst these
Yeah.
kids, and so like there's no adversity there to overcome either. I mean, it just goes back to the stakes conversation. There's just no stakes anywhere in this movie.
Right. So that's Home Team. It's out there. It's available. It sort of kicked off the Pro Bowl weekend and the whole Super Bowl phenomenon going forward, which, can we talk about the fact that the Super Bowl, they start coverage at 12 p.m. Eastern and it goes until 12 a.m.? Like, it's a 12-hour day for them. Game doesn't start till 6.
I mean, like I said, man, it's an event for people. There are people out there that'll start watching that pre-coverage at noon, and they won't go to bed until long after noon because God knows they'll probably have parties and they'll probably hang out afterwards and all that too, and still talk about the game. You know?
I know. I don't. I'm jealous of you over there in the Mountain time zone.
No, it's a completely different timeline.
Different timeline.
Different,
completely. Yeah. Like, it's so awesome that the game's in LA because you can be done with the Super Bowl and still have a night removed from football.
Or, but, what I'm probably going to do is bounce out after halftime and have even more of a night. But yeah, I get
that's what you do. That's what you always do. That has been Siegen's Super Bowl surprise forever.
Super Bowl surprise.
Is that he's there till the halftime show, and then after that happens, Siegen's going to go do more fun things. And it works. It's okay for me, but that's your bread and butter, Siegen. But what I did, I celebrated 3 years of finding out that the Resident Evil series is a series for me, as long as it's the remakes and not the horrendous original games with tank controls.
A lot of loaded comments going on right now, but go ahead, keep going.
But I celebrated my 3 years of getting the Platinum Trophy in Resident Evil 2 remake by watching a Resident Evil 2 remake called Resident Evil: Welcome to Raccoon City.
Nice.
I said raccoon.
Yep. If the characters in this movie said it that way, it would have at least made that interesting.
Yeah. Welcome to Raccoon City is a movie.
Yeah.
But not a lot happens in it. Spoilers, I guess, just a heads up in case anything. This movie is, on one hand, might be the best video game adaptation ever. In the fact that
it is
it's so faithful.
It is just beat for beat, to its detriment, right? It is so this is a movie that is purely made in reaction to after 6 movies being made by W.S. Anderson. What's his name there? E.S. Anderson.
Paul S. Anderson.
Paul S. Anderson.
Yeah.
So I was okay. Yeah. So Paul S. Anderson's whole series that he produces, directs, and all that sort of stuff. It is a well received. Even by fans of the franchise eventually come around to really kind of enjoying the continuity in it, because the secret is that the continuity in the Resident Evil games themselves is fucked. So why would we care if the movies are or aren't? But there has always been this call from the fan side specifically for specific elements. It's great that a character shows up and it's great that a villain shows up, but at the end of the day, there are iconic moments, and that's really one of the big elements with the Resident Evil series that people really, really latch into in the games. Is it's not just about it's really cool that Chris Redfield is here. It is that moment for when Chris Redfield punches a rock in Resident Evil 5, right? Or it's not just cool that Jill and Barry are in this scene together. I want to see Bill. I want to see Barry saying, "You were almost a Jill sandwich." Those kinds of those elements were just never there in the first 6 movies. And this movie is a direct kind of response to that. We're gonna hardcore go so into just hitting just theme park ride style. We're gonna hit the highlights of this series. Get in, strap in. It's a pretzel ride, and we're just gonna take you through this haunted house for the next 2 hours. And so say what you will, that is again kind of like we were saying with the game plan. What was the last one?
Home team.
Home team. Yeah. Kind of with Home Team, this idea that they intended to make this movie, they made this movie, and you love it or hate it, this is the product that they want. They cannot act like the studio came in and fixed shit and ruined this movie for me. This is the movie they wanted to make. And so it kind of is endearing in that this was something that we all asked for and they gave it to us, and it didn't work, and I'm okay with the fact that it didn't change the world, but I love that it is there. I love that it's real. No matter how kind of uneventful the movie really ends up being in the end, I still walked away feeling really good that I watched it.
Yeah, it's so my first thought watching this, I knew nothing going into Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City.
Nice.
And so that's not true. I knew one thing, and that was that Avon Yogia was playing Leon S. Kennedy. And that made me so happy as a not so secret Victorious fan. Because I love him. I love Beck from Victorious. And I'm so happy that, Jade from Victorious has gone on to get other work. Elizabeth Gillies in things like Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, working with Dennis Leary, and the stuff that she's done in Dynasty on the CW. But and obviously somebody like Kat there, whose name escapes me, Ariana Grande, and the career that she has been able to build to be probably the most successful person from late 2000s Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
Like, it just makes me happy that happens. But then there are just so many other really good actors from Victorious who don't get anything. So when I saw Even Yoga in Zombieland Double Tap, that was exciting. But then to see that, oh yeah, he's going to be playing Leon S. Kennedy, that was the other draw for me to this film. Mm-hmm. But then starting the movie and seeing that, that's a Latin person playing a traditionally white role, and then Jill Valentine also cast by a Latin actor, those things made me so happy. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, this has to have pissed off the capital G gamers.
I don't know, because I think if the movie were better, I think you would have heard more about that sort of stuff. Or maybe not. Maybe, I don't want to assume the worst sometimes about that stuff, because it's very easy in our position as people that don't feel that way to assume that other people must really be pissed about that sort of stuff. And like, that's always a chance, and that's always a risk. And I think the problem is like I said, is the movie isn't good enough to merit enough conversation online to find out.
Yeah, I found supporting evidence that like a lot of the people had issues with the casting, specifically the fact that the girl who plays Claire, I could never pronounce her name. It's just so long and just frightening to me. I'm being honest with you. Like, I'm all about trying to pronounce names, but that name, I look at it and I'm just like, I'm not even going to try. They're upset that she's 29 years old, where canonically Claire Redfield was 19 years old. And I'm just like, that happens all the time, right? That in Saved by the Bell, those were like 23-year-olds going to high school.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. She looked the part. She fit the role of Claire. It was
Kaya
awesome.
Scodelario.
Yeah, what?
Kaya Scodelario.
Yep, there you go. It just my Scod. Yeah.
Or Scott, yeah, Scodelario. I'm not sure how the accent, there's no accent on the O, but I'm not sure how you read that in whatever the native language is.
Yeah.
But yes, but Kaya Scodelario is the way that I've always said it.
Yeah, I always thought it was. I think if I tried, it'd be Skaya Delero is where I would go. But again, it doesn't matter. It's just one of those names like that. But people were very upset that like she's too old to play a 19-year-old, and it's like, okay, but is she? I don't.
Yeah, is I don't know, man.
And then the other complaint was that
people looking for issues.
Those are people looking for issues, exactly.
Right.
But then the other thing, like in the same articles where I found is she too old for it, there were also complaints that Leon S. Kennedy and Jill Valentine, iconic characters, had their races changed based on the casting. And I'm just like, how sad do you have to be that like that's gonna upset you about the movie? Which is interesting considering the last topic we're probably going to talk about in this episode. Harbingers, as it were.
Well, we've talked about it before, where it's that idea that, like, and I honestly think this comes from a background in theater, where the idea of a show constantly being redone by different artists in different parts. And so you're used to the idea that you're going to go and see, Noises Off again, but this time it's going to be an entirely, like, all black cast or something, right? And that's just, because that's what this particular theater troupe does. That's what, so we are kind of brought up with the idea of, like, the remake, the redo, and the reinvention literally just being part of the job, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, to see this sort of stuff out there, it never seems to hit you and I the same that it seems to hit a lot of people on the internet. And again, some of that could just be that it's also a vocal minority of people on the internet. I'm not even saying that we are somehow above everyone else in the world, just above a few fools online that want to complain about race every chance they get. Race being introduced, to be clear. I'm like that idea that like they're somehow going to cast this character in a race other than the one I expect is upsetting to me, is something that is foreign to us, because like again, we're just kind of used to the idea of playing with like, okay, and how does this read? Like we should try this and then talk about it afterwards, right? Rather than saying you can't do that. It's why would you do that? And that's the conversation we should be having about this sort of stuff is, well, because how about traditionally the Resident Evil games are pretty white, and the one time that they ever ventured out of that, or the first time they ever ventured out of that, was because they got so much backlash about big old white Chris Redfield going through Africa killing a bunch of indigenous Africans like with a shotgun. They were like, maybe we should give him a indigenous side like companion character so that it doesn't look so bad. So literally their only reason for doing it was because they got called out by that first preview.
Yeah.
like it's a series that is pretty infamous with the ways in which it treats race.
And that's the thing that I thought as I was like looking, as I was watching the movie. I'm like, wow, I never really considered just how white the Resident Evil series is.
Yeah, or if they ever introduce a character that is something other than white, it is upsettingly leaned into, and a lot of that is fed by. I'm not defending that it happens, because I think that it's shit that it happens, and the reason that it ends up happening and they really lean into it is because these games are made to be like B movie style, right? Yeah. And so people that make that kind of art automatically feel like they kind of get carte blanche to be offensive, because that's just part of the the slasher movies and this is supposed to be exploitative, right? And it's like, no, so you don't get to show naked women and you don't get to show racist caricatures and shit like that just because that's what they did before. Like, do better. And that's another thing that like I think the movie does really well, is it does that better. It has other people of this otherness like represented on screen in like cool ways that like I don't know, I just never really, you don't think about how white the series is until it's not white in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm like, it's Marvin is the only non-white character in Resident Evil 2 remake.
And then in 3 you have the buddy there from the Carlos, yeah. So it's not that these characters didn't exist in the series before, but when they are there, they're not main characters. They're not elevated to the status of these like hero figures that we put these other guys at and stuff like that. And sometimes they are upsettingly problematic in the ways in which they're portrayed.
And they do unfortunately stick to that B movie stuff where like Marvin is the first one dead. He's sort of the sacrificial lamb who semi ups the stakes for the Leon storyline.
Exactly. Right.
And then also Carlos has a partner who's an African American, and he ends up being the one to sacrifice himself so that Carlos and Jill can escape.
Right.
Like those same sort of tropes that occur. So, I don't know, having them be people of color, it really worked for me, and it was an interesting way to recontextualize the game. And the best part about Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City is how it recontextualized a bunch of scenes that are iconic from the game. Mm-hmm. Like, Dale, as somebody who's not played the games, one of my favorite moments watching the movie was when they stepped into the Spencer mansion and they do the full camera like focus all around the room to show you just how opulent it is.
Right.
And her looking at me and going, so that's in the game, right? Because there was a lot of lingering on little things that wouldn't have mattered if this were a movie, not based on a video game. And I'm like, that's correct. But then going further with like Spencer Mansion stuff, the helicopter crashing into it, that's so Resident Evil 2. Like that's an iconic Resident Evil 2 scene, but it was cool to see it contextualized to the Spencer Mansion to kind of change up your expectations of what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think one of the really messy things about the Resident Evil games that really starts to screw with people is the timeline, right? Yeah. And the idea being that like Resident Evil 2 is supposed to take place within 48 hours after the first one. Like Jill,
it's 3 months, because the first one is June 1998, and then it's 3 months later that Claire shows up in Raccoon City.
So this is the So this is where it becomes really sticky and gross. Yes, except that then through dialogue and like files and shit that you find, they talk about things that have happened. And she literally, Spencer Mansion is just on the outskirts of Raccoon City.
Right.
So this idea being that she escaped Spencer Mansion and then like was on the run, quote unquote, for 3 months,
Oh,
and then comes back, or did she just run home to grab her shit and go? Because if you read anything outside of what the game tells you as far as the dates are, it really implies the latter rather than the first.
I'm not
So
even talking about Jill. I'm talking about Claire. I
no,
haven't heard from
right.
my brother in 3 months, and that's why I'm going to back to Raccoon City.
Well, right,
But
and
Jill and her
and
running
Jill in
stuff,
three,
yeah,
and
Jill's
in
makes no sense at all.
which is supposed to be just before two, right? Like
Right.
it's really fucking bizarre the
It
ways in which the timeline
contextualizes
works.
and yeah, because yeah,
Right.
3 is supposed to happen. At least the remake, remake is supposed to be. It opens on the day before the events of Resident Evil 2 remake, and then when Claire gets stabbed after the second fight against Nemesis, huge
Hmm.
spoilers for these games, but we've talked about them on the show before. That's when the events of Resident Evil 2 occur, and then Jill wakes up the day after Resident Evil 2 to finish out the Resident Evil 3 storyline,
Right,
which
right.
also doesn't really make a whole hell of a lot of sense because the end of Resident Evil 2 remake, you watch Raccoon City get nuked in the background. So really, Jill wakes up and has like an hour before the town's gonna get nuked and still somehow makes it out.
Hmm. Yeah, so time is fucked, right? Like in the games, right? So
Yeah.
so that idea that in the movie that they are able to just kind of play with what happens when and where and all that sort of stuff is a really cool move because of the fact that it isn't just telling one particular game story. I think that the other thing is that all of this shit that we're talking about and all of the things that made this movie like work. I think they were probably what 20 years ago when the first Resident Evil came out. Like they were probably afraid to fuck with that so much, and the idea being let's just tell a completely new story because if we
Yeah.
try telling the story from the games, it's too confusing, convoluted, and broken for it to work. So
Yeah.
rather than try and adhere to that, piss off a bunch of people, let's just do this thing that is just completely fresh. And then they just pepper in as the rest of the series go in more and more stuff just to kind of appease fans, and it ends up working for them. Like I, you know, you can argue whether or not you like it or hate it. At the end of the day, it worked just fine for them, and the Resident Evil movie series has its own like thriving fan base all unto itself. And more than a few of them are people that play the games. Like you can't separate the two. So it's just this movie is just this Welcome to Raccoon City is so interesting to me because like it's also not necessarily a movie that like I don't think the fan base was demanding,
Mm-mm.
but like we're very happy to have it. It's the other reason why I don't think it really lit the world on fire is that like nobody was like clamoring for it. There was definitely fans that wanted to see it and were willing to see it and have like it, you know, there are people out there that have opinions on it, but like it didn't strike me as the kind of thing that like you know at the height of Resident Evil hysteria, zeitgeist, whatever it was back in the like late 90s, like then you definitely have people that were
Yeah.
just like we need to see this on screen, this is amazing. And now here we are 20 years removed from that.
Well, I think what it comes down to, and the reason why they did it, is they've been trying so hard to make this style of Resident Evil movie. So even if they're able to deliver on it for the 25th anniversary, then they've at least achieved something. I feel like it's a personal goal in the eyes of Capcom and Sony and everything
Yeah.
that was working together is we had these 6 movies and they were good, but they weren't the movie that we ever wanted to make. Because
Yeah.
scripts that were very much adaptations of the games existed and just never got off the ground. In fact, the first Resident Evil, they had been shopping around a script, and when they're like, this isn't going to work as a movie, they bought Paul S. Anderson's script for another movie that I think was just called Undead, that was the script at the time. And he's like, obviously it was inspired by the fact that I had played those games, but then they're like, yeah, we like it. Can we turn it into more Resident Evil-y?
Yeah.
And then that is
Yeah.
what begets it. And it's so cool because this is the type of series where you can have that, where that can be the narrative of the creative stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, so to actually like kind of fix the timeline a little bit and have the Spencer Mansion be going on at the same time that the like outbreak in Raccoon City happens is really interesting. The layering on of Code Veronica stuff kind of felt way out of place.
It's basically you're talking about the three biggest
Three basic, yeah.
storylines in the Resident Evil like universe, right? At least origin wise, right? Because there is this idea of that Raccoon City really establishes Resident Evil 2 really establishes the whole like Raccoon City element and the idea that it is a writ large issue. And then Resident Evil 1 really focuses on the micro level of it happening all within one place, which is kind of something that we see throughout the series and in other strings. And then Code Veronica is the one that is like the worldwide version of this story, because there's all sorts of weird shit about how it's implied that there's things like this happening everywhere, right? So there's it kind of it makes sense in what they might be hoping to be the first of many movies, or at least 2 or 3 movies, to kind of introduce all 3 of those storylines, and then they can go wherever they want after that. They can do a bigger movie with a worldwide kind of a, like epic feel, like a World War Z style Resident Evil movie, or they can really go insular with it and do like a fucking like Riddick. I think of when they went back to doing the much more insular version of like a Riddick story in that last movie with Vin Diesel, as opposed to what they had done in Chronicles, right? They went back to the Pitch Black style of this is just a small team of people that are just going to get wrecked by an alien, and like they could totally do that. They could do the next Resident Evil movie if they choose to. I don't know. The other thing to remember about like success and stuff like that, and where this movie goes, if it goes anywhere, is that they've also kind of they've already, Capcom and the Resident Evil series have kind of really benefited from the whole like, we're going to put this thing out and like it'll maybe be in theaters for like a day or two, but then we're going to throw it on DVD, we're going to throw it on streaming services, we're going to team up with Netflix for a series, and it's going to have legs long after the in theater like concept for this, because that's what they've done with the animated movies for 2 decades now.
Yeah.
Like they've really kind of they've loved the idea of being able to put out that animated movie in theaters for like a special weekend, a special event. You pay an extra $20 to go and see it because it's the only weekend it's going to be in theaters, and then it's going to come out in DVD in 3 months, and then you buy the DVD on top of that, and they make your money off of that, or they get to put it up on a streaming service like Hulu or Netflix and get money off of that, you know. And the animated series that they just did with Netflix this past year that I adored.
I haven't watched that yet. I really want to, but I want to see
It's only 4 episodes long.
Oh, cool.
It's only 4 episodes long. They're half an hour to 40 minutes each, I think, if I remember correctly. And it's a great little like story in the universe, like really good Leon Kennedy stuff in it and things like that. Still nothing like the hallway fight scene in Regeneration. Is that I'm trying to remember the name of the movie that they did. Degeneration. Yeah. There's a phenomenal like.
Because I was just thinking about that's such a like that's the movie. When I think about a Resident Evil movie, that's the one that always comes to mind. Yeah. And probably because it was around the same time that Advent Children had happened, so like the world was ready for that level of video game adaptation storytelling.
Yeah,
and they really took advantage of it.
And they have their own problems. They're not like blockbuster films. There's a reason why they kind of exist in like the $5 bin at Walmart. But like I was saying, like Capcom, I think, has kind of gotten used to that being kind of the story for these particular pieces of media. So the movie not doing gangbusters in theaters, I'm sure, is a blow. I'm not going to act like they were expecting it and it's okay. But the idea that they probably haven't given up on the series just yet, because of the fact that in 10 years we could be looking back on this movie as like a fan favorite for midnight films and stuff like that, because it very much for me is that, because of the idea that it's kind of uneventful and you don't get invested in any one thing or person, the idea that it's the kind of movie that you could throw up at midnight at a movie theater where you can get like beer and wings in the theater with you, like it kind of hits that sweet spot really well.
Oh, yeah, this could totally become the next Rocky Horror Picture Show. There were moments that it felt like that in the house.
Yeah.
Where Dale like just said asshole, and I'm like, are we watching Rocky Horror? Because it kind of feels like we're watching Rocky Horror. And yeah, he just said Brad and you said asshole, and it was hilarious. I also really like that Nathan Dales played Vickers, because I love Letterkenny, but then like Vickers had nothing to do, and it was just like, oh, I just get to smile that Nathan Dale's in this movie.
Yeah.
It was fun, and you know that, and it's already been referenced hilariously, even though it wasn't one of those moments like those movies that shook the house. We were watching Beverly Hills Cop 2 yesterday, which great movie, really really good sequel, Beverly Hills Cop 2, and he shoots a rocket launcher, and Dale goes, "Found it in first class." and we lost it. Like, we just lost it. And that's
Yeah.
just funny. That's just funny to us. It worked.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the one question I have about Resident Evil Raccoon City, and then we'll move past it, is the director and everybody around it said that they were making a super scary movie. And is my, like, picker just off? Like, am I just so desensitized that I never found this movie to be scary?
I mean, there's definitely scary moments whether you're invested or not in this story. I think there's definitely some good jump scares and some gross stuff and things like that. I think the bigger problem is that because you weren't invested in anything that was happening or the people on screen, no. Like, you're not off. Like, that part of what makes a scary movie scary is that we're worried about what's going to happen. And if you're not really, like, if you haven't been in a room long enough to care what happens to the room, then no, it's never going to be that upsetting to you, right? So, like, I don't think that the movie is as scary as I think they were hoping it was going to be when they made those kinds of comments, because I just don't think that they really pull you in enough to care enough about the stuff. So, like, it's really kind of unfortunate. That being said, there's definitely a couple of moments that I jumped as I was watching it.
I think for me, the issue became, because Dale said that she's like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. This movie was very scary to me.
Yeah.
I think for me, where the issue came in is it's based on stories that I have played to death.
Yeah.
Like,
I
know what's
the characters.
I know the characters. I understand the beats. And that's why those moments that, like, adjusted things were so much fun to me. Like, when the helicopter came flying in, I'm like, oh, that was cool, because usually that I was expecting that to happen, but at the police station. But then, like, unfortunately, the police station is just kind of uneventful as a result of that.
The other side to that conversation you got to remember is, again, this is a movie made in direct response to a lot of what was going on with the other series, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of, especially the back end of that series, the back three, but really the back 4 or 5, like, the first one is the only one that feels like a horror movie. After that, it becomes action horror, and eventually by the end of that series, really just an action movie. There's really, in the last couple of movies especially, you're there for the big set pieces. You're there to see stuff blow up. You're there to see people kicking the shit out of each other, and yes, there are monsters, but the monsters are so absurd that they're not scary. It's just so, like, there's a lot that was kind of lost in terms of the horror elements. But you also have to think about that in terms of the Resident Evil franchise and how for just years they were catching that kind of guff about how they had kind of lost the scary. And so 7 and 8 in the video games have been such a quote unquote return to form because they are scary again, is definitely a conversation that's out there. And this movie's just, and those comments are just riding that wave of just being like, hey, like, we're going to be so much scarier than those last couple of movies. And we're going to be so much scarier than you remember Resident Evil being the last couple of years, because we know that Resident Evil was supposed to be scary and we're going to bring it back. And I think they do that. I think they bring back the creep factor and the scare factor more than those movies had before, and more than the later games 5 and 6 had. They succeed in that. Is it scary though? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it was like the scariest movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's going to be super scary, and I'm like, I don't know. And I will definitely say the first time that I experience a Resident Evil game, like, I'm up and I'm sort of like in it so that I'm like prepared. Like, I know that anything can come from any direction, and I need to be with it. And then once I've already lived through the game, like, I've finished it, it's just now I get to have fun. Now I'm not afraid anymore because I've seen the monster's face. And I was kind of
also
hoping
you've unlocked the Magnum with, like, infinite reload. So yeah,
infinite ammo really does change the way you approach things. Having a circular saw that you can just have running as you're running through the world. God, Resident Evil 7 is so good. I love Resident Evil 7. Yeah, it's one of the things. It changes the way that you approach the game, and I will admit that. But I guess I was hoping that, like, I'd be more on edge for this first movie, and for the first viewing of this movie, and then the subsequent ones would be like that, but it wasn't. It was just like from the beginning, I'm like, no, I know what's gonna happen. I'm not afraid. And even then,
part of it is the disconnect of you're not playing, right?
Because
you're
I'm not
watching.
Yeah.
You know, you're not the one that's at risk. It's there's also some of that's really interesting to think about. But I don't know.
I don't know. It's definitely worth a viewing. And honestly, you know what? Say report dreams and goals. Let's make it the next fucking Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, right.
Let's do what we can. Let's come up with the props that you're going to throw at the screen.
Yeah.
Like it'll be something, right? Guys bring gauze and ladies bring flaming hot Cheetos, and at the itchy tasty scene, you both just throw them at the screen.
Oh God.
I don't know. Make sure you have plenty of green herbs. Which brings us to the final thing. Green herbs is going to be my transition point too. Futurama's coming back, which I thought was going to be a bigger thrust of this whole episode, but sports and Resident Evil. I'm actually kind of happy we talked as much as we did about sports, because there's been a lot of thoughts under my mind that I'm glad to have shared in this. But the return of Futurama to Hulu is an important thing to discuss. And I know that at the time that we're recording this, everybody has already had the discussion, because it happened on Wednesday of last week. Also a Nintendo Direct, which let's give it 2 seconds for the Nintendo Direct. How do you feel about the Mario Kart 8 DLC?
I'm excited. I don't know. I love Mario Kart, so whatever.
Yeah,
we'll talk more about the Nintendo stuff in detail as we get more and more information and details.
Yeah.
Also, I'm waiting for Kirby to come out. But
that Kirby game looks like it's going to be exciting. I hope that I finish Elden Ring in the month that I have before it comes out. I know. Everybody seems to have these thoughts about the Mario Kart DLC, and the only thing that I will say is $25 for 48 new tracks. I'm not upset about that.
Right.
I think I'm more upset about the fact that this wasn't the plan from the beginning with Mario Kart 8. It feels like it's 5 years too late for me to care about it.
I mean, would you rather that they slapped Mario Kart 9 on the title of this and you paid
No, not at all. Like, that's the thing.
It?
I am one of those people. Like, these people, like, I wish it were Mario Kart 9. And it's like, no, I'm fine them using the same engine and releasing 48 new tracks for it for only $25. I'm there for that. Where it becomes an issue for me is the fact that wouldn't it have been cool if this is what had been happening from the beginning with Mario Kart 8?
Yeah. Well, like I said, we'll talk more about it when we see the actual stuff and all that stuff. But the
more important thing, the thing that actually caught my attention, where I really cared about, because I didn't watch the Nintendo Direct, but I saw Futurama's coming back to Hulu, and I guess I didn't expect another one of these, right? Another the show's back.
I don't know. Hulu is long way back in the day, back when they were just owned by Fox and not by Disney as well. We talked a lot about how Hulu was always clutching at straws, despite the fact it seems like they're pretty successful. They always feel like they're clutching at straws to survive. And this feels like one of those weird moves that at a younger time in a streaming service's life, they would pull this kind of risk, this kind of weird move. It just seems like such an odd thing for somebody like a Hulu to do right now, because there's just so much around bringing shows back right now that is just dangerous, and like unless you're sure of what you're doing, like, it is a really wild risk for them to be taking, because they're risking burning a lot of bridges that were never in danger of being set fire.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I mean, especially, so I'm somebody who, so Futurama was canceled when we were younger. Like, Fox said, we're done.
After 4 seasons?
After 4 seasons, like the Star Trek, where no fan has gone before for a long time, was sort of the finale episode of Futurama. Right. And it was not because, like, there had been unproduced scripts, I believed, or maybe some produced, just were never going to show them episodes that happened. And that's when Adult Swim bought them and was like, well, we're going to resurrect and we're going to show these unshown episodes, or we're going to finish this unstuff, which is where no fan has gone before becomes supplanted with The Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings as the series finale. And then,
which has a beautiful moment at the end. I think it's important to point out the finality of these episodes as we talk about the mini finals, right? The Star Trek one didn't really do anything to wrap up much of anything. The only cool thing about it was that it was a direct reference to Star Trek, and like, as a show that is very influenced by it, that was cool. It was cool that the last episode that they got to do was an homage to the one that really kind of, it felt like it was full circle for them in a weird way. Then,
and it also, I just want to say about the Star Trek one also, it also kind of said, like, it's all right that it's over, because look what happened with Star Trek. Like, it only had the 65 episodes, and it has lasted. Like, we're saying that even though this is the end of Futurama, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the end of Futurama.
Right,
like,
right.
It's still going to influence culture. It still happened.
So a little bit of a headier idea,
Yeah,
and it still doesn't feel like a final episode as you
yeah,
watch it. It's just that in retrospect, that's there, right?
yeah.
Then you have Devil's Hands, and that has a beautiful moment right at the end where after failing once again to really impress Leela, we see him kind of going back and being able to show her what he's learned on the holophoner, and it's a beautiful moment between the two of them, right?
Yeah.
And so that has that kind of final ending there. Then you get the movies, which were produced by Comedy Central slash CBS or somebody like that. I forget who else was involved in that.
So weird. Like but the movies were meant to be just sort of a standalone thing. We had gotten into this moment where the movies were what you did with your failed
Well,
animated shows.
they are specifically built. This was part of the contract deal, is that each one of them was going to be specifically built to be able to be broken up into 3 or 4 episodes, so that they could then be shown in syndication with the rest of the series when Comedy Central bought the rights to them. So like, there's a reason that they are able to break them up, like they are, and they show them on TV.
Yeah.
Randomly, they will show like a mid episode and not the follow up too. Like it's
I know,
like
it's
that
awkward.
kind of ridiculous. But so the idea being like, yeah, we'll pay for you to do these movies that will give you a really good chance to finish off the series and give it some finality. But what you'll do for us is you'll make it so that we can call it a quote unquote season and break it up into what does it become, 16 episodos I think altogether.
It becomes 16 episodes total. 4 times 4. Yeah, that's exactly how that works.
Right. Yeah.
It's I don't know. I guess it didn't feel like that way when they started. It felt like that was revealed to us later on. It didn't feel like when those movies were coming out that they weren't going to be the movies. I don't know. I guess maybe it's just me misremembering, but I remember when Bender's Big Score came out and everybody being like, oh, okay, so it's the Futurama movies. And then it was like a little bit later when it was revealed, and they're going to be chopped up and put on TV. Yeah. And it's like, oh, okay. Is it because the sales are too good that you don't want people to rush out and get the DVDs? Like, what is the thought process behind this?
I won't say for every moment, but there are definite there were definite fade to black for commercial moments in a lot of things, in a lot of those, like in retrospect,
yes.
Looking back, you could be like, oh, okay, you knew that there was a chance this was going to happen, / it was already going to happen when you made this thing. But yeah, so they do the movie series and eventually get to the part where that becomes considered the 6th season because it can be broken up like that. But then, then all of a sudden it came back.
Yeah, it was the 6th season, and it was another finale, Into the Wild Green Yonder.
That's
and
right. Yeah,
the
it ends with the idea that they're going to go into they're going to go into the breach, right? And the idea being like, we don't know what comes next, but we're going to do it together. And you get Fry and Leela holding hands, and then boom, fade to black. Yeah.
And then they went into the breach, and then years later, like 2010, I was working on the cruise ship, and I remember so much of this is tied to my time on the cruise ship, getting that, like, oh my God, the first episodes of the new Futurama is available, and us all getting together in a tiny little cabin to watch them on a MacBook because somebody had them on a hard drive.
Wild.
Like, just one of the weirdest things. And then it became one of those things that, like, while I'm on land, while I'm in port in America, I'm going to try to get as many new episodes of Futurama as I can.
Yeah.
And they became like a sort of currency on board that ship. And then it runs from season 7 to season 10 on Comedy Central. So 4 more years. And it has the finale where they stop time and they get to live life forever.
Finale.
Like, for real, this is it.
Like, the entire last episode of that series is just a celebration of Fry and Leela, but also with really good stuff peppered in from other characters. But then, like, the last 10 minutes of the entire episode is just them just together, alone, and talking about what the future may be, and then given the opportunity to literally do it all over again.
Yeah. It's nice. We'll do it forever. Sort of like a Groundhog Day ending. We'll just keep doing this forever into perpetuity. And it was a fitting end to the show for what was, and I'm just being honest here, varying levels of quality in those last 4 seasons.
And throughout the whole series. Varying levels of quality throughout the whole series. That's always been kind of one of the things about Futurama, is there's amazing episodes of Futurama. But there's also some pretty subpar ones. There's some episodes that you watch, and especially if you've seen them a million times, which at this point, anyone that's paying attention to Futurama has done the whole falling asleep to them on Hulu thing. That's why Hulu knows that there's something to be done about making new series, is because people are still watching watching that series on a regular basis and in huge swaths. Like, it's not just somebody putting an episode on to remind themselves. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do a run through the whole series again. Yeah, I'm gonna do all the movies this weekend. Like, they people still do that, and that's why Hulu's like, you know what we could do is we could make some new ones that we get all the money for. Like, that's also the other side of it.
And it does feel like a response to the fact that Futurama is back on Adult Swim and has been doing real big numbers since it came back to the Adult Swim lineup. Yeah. Very similar to King of the Hill. Because, like, Futurama and King of the Hill, those were sort of the bread and butter in the early years of Adult Swim with the animation. I mean, you had Family Guy, but then they followed up Family Guy by getting Futurama and King of the Hill, and those did gangbusters and had the DVD sales. And then they come back to Adult Swim, and that's when Mike Judge is talking about, yeah, we're going to do a follow-up to King of the Hill. And now Hulu saying, yeah, we're going to do more episodes of Futurama. It really feels influenced by them being back in syndication, where everyone kind of goes for syndication. Because it's not like Futurama ever disappeared. They were showing on Comedy Central, but not during quote-unquote prime time, not during like Nick at Night hours, where it's destination viewing to go to Adult Swim, and knowing that, oh, I'll be able to watch some Futurama, I'll be able to watch some King of the Hill. That works for people.
Right. Yeah. So they want to bring Futurama back. And, like, you know, I personally am excited about the idea of new episodes of Futurama, just because, like, again, I've been watching so much of the damn show for so much of my life that, like, getting new elements of it is nothing to, like, turn my nose up at. But I assume that you want to address the kind of the albatross around its neck, where it looks like it might not have John DiMaggio in it.
Yeah, it might not have John DiMaggio in it, which is really strange when the announcement is a photo of Bender with a banner reading, "We're back, baby!"
Yeah, it seems really weird that they didn't get something like this in place or sorted out before announcing it. Like, if this was not, like, rock solid, somebody done fucked up letting everybody know it was coming back.
No, it's
like,
totally a bargaining tactic, and that's the grossest part about it. That is the grossest part about it. Because it has been revealed, John DiMaggio himself has taken to Twitter to talk about the fact that I'm in negotiations with them about my contract for this. And the reason that they announced it was to sort of strong arm him into maybe compromising. Because look at how upset people are that you're not going to come back, John DiMaggio.
Yeah, there's a huge risk involved there, and then we're seeing it play out, where what you've got is now a bunch of people saying that they have no interest in it if he's not there. And, you know,
that's what it feels like. I mean, again, I don't have any proof of that, but the fact that it has come out that John DiMaggio was already talking to them about his contract to come back as Bender. Yeah. So for them to jump the gun before that contract was finalized really feels like, because we've seen it before with other things where they announce something and then the people's reaction to it is what drives home the ability to get something they couldn't get before.
I mean, what it really reeks of is in the Disney side of things, and they are involved in these conversations, is like the kind of stuff that they do with Marvel, where they will announce intentions to do certain things without talking to the comic book artists, and then the comic artists are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because all of their fans that buy their shit are all excited because Disney's going to produce a show or a cartoon or something based on their stuff, and so they kind of get stuck agreeing to shit like contracts, because they're like, well, at this point you already said you're doing it, so either you're doing it with me or without me, I might as well sign the damn thing. And they're not in a position like somebody like a John DiMaggio to go to their fan base and say, hey, I don't feel like signing this contract till it's fair, can you guys support me in that? Because they may not get that support from the audience in a way that somebody like a John DiMaggio, who between Futurama and fucking
Adventure Time
and
Final Fantasy X.
Well, I mean, even in the same wheelhouse, Disenchantment. I mean, he's got a huge leading role on that show, and so like having people that are that he meets with all the time at conventions, and I'm sure like has all sorts of online interactions with and stuff like that. He's very connected to his audience and has a lot of faith, and I mean, it's come to fruition that it was a good call that they're on his side, right? And that people are gonna make some noise for him. He's in a much better position than a lot of these other things. But like, let's not act like Disney themselves don't do this kind of shit all the time with artists, like you're saying. Like, it is definitely a tactic that is used by them, like pre-announcing stuff without getting all of this shit in place, and then anyone involved feels like, well, at this point it's either happening or it's my fault that it doesn't, so let's do this thing. And luckily we're seeing more from the artists fighting back against this sort of thing.
Yeah.
The John DiMaggio stuff is an example of it, but also I think of stuff like not just Matt Fraction, but who is the artist? I'm mad I can't remember the artist's name from the Hawkeye stuff, and about how he kind of really called out and started a lot of buzz about the fact that like the art and the style of the characters in that show were really heavily influenced by Matt Fraction's time writing for Hawkeye, and the art involved there. And like, he was like never really given much compensation for that, despite the fact that the iconic imagery that you see in that show is based on very specifically his versions of those
that
characters
he drew and created,
right.
and especially like the title cards and everything in the credits was all aping his work.
Right. And so, like, like you were saying, like, this is not an unusual tactic, especially from this particular side of the entertainment industry.
Yeah. And honestly, it's one of those situations, the joke that I was making when I first heard about it, before John DiMaggio had spoken up to be like, hey, this is what they did, was, I'm not going to watch it if Bender's not in the new series. Also, where do I submit an audition tape to be the new Bender? Like, like, it's one of those things, like, I mean, I won't watch it if John DiMaggio's out there, but if I could voice Bender, you know what, I take it. But the grossest thing about it, you bring up the whole Disney aspect of it. Hulu is now part of Disney, right? It's an undeniable fact that they were acquired by Disney when Disney acquired Fox.
Right.
Holding out for money is exactly what you should do, because it's not like they don't have it.
Yeah. No, I know. It's like somebody online said, this is a millionaire yelling at a billion-dollar company. I really have no interest in this conversation. And that is a totally respectable opinion, because they're not wrong. Like it is a man that is extremely successful in his career, in a career that not many people get successful in. But does that mean that he should sit back and take it on the fucking chin when Disney is the one swinging? Like, no. Like he has every right to see what he can do as an artist in terms of his contract, especially because, as we've pointed out, like, this isn't his only job, this isn't his only gig.
He works. It's not just that he's working, he works. He is doing so many voice acting gigs that adding another one would either mean having to give up some of the other work that he's doing, or just putting himself into this situation where he's even closer to a potential burnout.
Well, and on top of this, like, the idea is, like you said, the varying degrees of success that Futurama has had, like, on and off. A lot of that is because of things like studio interference and stuff, but some of it was also just because it took a while for fan bases to build for it. I have openly talked on the show about how when Futurama first started, I wasn't really into it. It wasn't until much later, when I was able to really kind of binge and understand a lot of what was going on in Futurama, like, that I became much more attached to it, right? And so, like, that idea that, like, going back to that well is not a guarantee. You know what I mean? So he's also saying, like, look, this is one of my most popular, famous characters of all time. If I'm going to come back and take that risk with you guys for what could potentially be a thing that really becomes a black mark on this series and this character, like, I got to make sure that it's worth it, right? Like, and that's a totally fair conversation as well. That, like, maybe he's an asshole in real life, and maybe this is just him being a dick, but at the end of the day, who he is as a human being doesn't really have anything to do with this. This is about fair contracts for people that are in a position to deserve a certain amount of money for what they do. And unfortunately, because of the way that this character is valued and the show is valued, and the money behind it, he is right to say, like, look, there's got to be some serious money involved here if we're going to do this thing. And my hope is that it benefits everybody involved, not just him. I hope other people involved realize that they should also be asking for their fair share as well.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Is it really the other side of it that is just kind of annoying to me is, if this is what was going to be happening, did he discuss it with others and they're just like, no, we're going to take whatever we can to do more Futurama? Or was it one of those situations where he was being the lone holdout because I think we should get more money for the fact that they're not bringing back Futurama because it's kind of successful, right? They're bringing it back because they're hoping to make money from it. We should be able to get our fair share in that. And it also really speaks to how much the voice acting just industry has changed over the years. Yeah. That they would be sitting there demanding their fair wage and their fair cut of it. I mean, You're not wrong. It's millionaires yelling at billionaires in a lot of ways, right? It's famous people. It's stuff that doesn't really relate to us, but it's also kind of nice that the value of work that we're seeing in these minimum wage jobs and people saying I'm not going to do shit work for shit wages anymore is reaching out and sort of affecting our entire like socioeconomic system.
I mean,
A way.
anybody
Like,
that wants to, right, anybody that wants to tune out from this sort of controversy totally has the right to. And it's not that it's something that I feel like, no, you need to be invested because this is a fight for the people or any of that sort of stuff. That's not the story here. But at the end of the day, like, it's a thing that I care about. I care about Futurama, and I want to see what happens with it. And I'm interested to see what they decide to do. If this is going to be one of those things that quietly goes away and the series, maybe gets made without him, with him, doesn't get made. Like there's a lot up in the air all of a sudden because of the stuff that's come out. And it is really interesting that like Hulu went whole hog on like, we're just going to throw it out there and the world's just going to let us know the best way to handle this is essentially what they said.
Yeah, it does. It reeks so much as we're testing the waters with an announcement that this thing is happening.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it really, the weirdest thing about it is Bender is all over the marketing for their coming back. And when you don't have Bender, that seems real strange.
Yeah. I don't know.
All right. Well, that's it. Those are the things that happened over the last week. It's been a week so far, the second week of February.
You tricked me. You started going left, you turned right, and now we're never going to get to go back, are we?
What do you mean? What do you want to say? No, go back. What do we got?
Because you were talking about green and how we were gonna have to eventually talk about meaning of words and all that shit, and you made me watch South Park for the first time in like 3 years, and we didn't even talk about it.
We can talk about it. We should talk about it. What a wonderful way to close out this episode, and definitely worthy of more time in this particular episode. And that is that South Park, another show that's lasted. Well, 25th year, right? This is the 25th season of it, in lieu of like movies and specials that happened in the interim.
Oh yeah, and I was gonna say like even like the like weird kind of we're not sure what to do with COVID, so we're just gonna kind of just put out some specials when we can type attitude they've had for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But yeah, now they're officially back as a season.
Officially back as a season, and the coolest thing about South Park in I'll say like the last 3-4 seasons, it's just an easier way to refer to it, is how Matt Stone and Trey Parker are admitting the fact that when this show came into prominence, it was a very different world. And they're addressing a lot of those problems. And episode 2 of season 25 addressed a really big one. And it addressed it in a way that I loved. It addressed it in a way that I had to pause the episode and compose myself because it's not something that I was expecting. And the explanation of it was so good that essentially what South Park did was create their own Mandela effect.
Oh man, I love it. Yes. So just to give a quick rundown, they addressed some long running issues in the ways in which they deal with Black people in general on the show, but very specifically the character of Tolkien, as we will get to in a second here. But the idea being that they address the fact that he is the quote unquote token Black character, but that in and of itself is a form of racism, which if this is news to anybody, like, I think that's one of the things that kind of hit me just a little bit the wrong way about the episode. And it's not, I think I've been too divorced from South Park for too long to really kind of feel like this was an episode, like to feel like I was part of the story. You know what I mean? Like a lot of what was going on in the episode was stuff that it felt like was a little too late for me. But I think part of it is because, like I said, I have not been in that crowd. I have not been part of like the group that like gets together every Wednesday night to watch the new episode since like years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago. Like I've been aware of what's gone on in South Park, and in terms of like, because it's still out there and like it's hard to ignore when you are on the Twitter that I'm on, and when we're into HBO and it shows up there and all that sort of stuff. But like so there's this weird element for me where a lot of the stuff that they were addressing, I was just like, yay, finally, that idea. But but you know, addressing kind of that stuff with that character, it is cool that they're doing it. Like I'm not opposed to that. Part of it also just like I'm also not quite sure exactly what read I was supposed to have by the end of it, because I'm not sure if I'm supposed to know. I mean, and the thing is they address it in the episode is like who's the bad guy, right? Like for feeling one way or the other. There's definitely some clear bad guys, but then there's also this added element of just like, well, you also, you know, you were being informed by this terrible thing that was surrounding you, and like you got to kind of deal with that, but also like it's okay, you figured it out and you fixed it, right? Because Stan, like, realizing that the character of Token after all of these years has not actually been named Token but Tolkien is like funny and like great, and the idea that like everybody seemed to know it but him, and the ways in which he kind of like he for like a hot second leans into this like weird like vocal liberalism, like too vocal liberalism about like educating the masses, and everybody is just like, no, we already knew this, that kind of shit. Like that's all really funny and definitely really poignant and all that. It's this idea that just like throughout the entire episode he is struggling with this element of himself that he didn't like, and it made me really uncomfortable. And like again, I know all of this stuff is the point. It's just I've been so far removed from South Park over the last few years that like I wasn't expecting to fall into that funk, and I should have been.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from with that. If you're not prepared for that type of thing, and I guess every time I go into an episode of South Park, I'm always prepared for whatever's going to happen. And seeing it called The Big Fix, seeing the title of the episode, and then the initial storyline being Randy having to find a black partner in order to keep his weed business successful, like that would have been enough for me in terms of their usual brand of like satire with what's happening in the world.
Yeah. Well, right.
Yeah.
And specifically because he now currently runs a weed business.
Yeah.
I think you said that, but like that was also something that I had no idea was quite happening. So like again, not quite tuned into South Park. Like I knew that weed was definitely an element of the show now. I didn't realize how deep it had become one. And is that like new this season? Like
Oh no, he's Integrity Farms has been around for at least 3 seasons.
Yeah, yeah. So like the idea being like that kind of element to it. And you know, the whole thing about how he chooses to do this whole thing about inviting black people over to the farm so that he can take pictures to show off that he has black friends, like and that whole element is again like hilarious and poignant and always will be, because that kind of shit is always, and the fact that it all is blossoms from one comment made by one person at a convention, right? Like that's the other thing, is like it's also all born from him listening to this expert at this in this one moment in the context of, we're here to discuss issues with the industry, so this is an issue that I see. So it's not even like it was like somebody on the street called him out for it. Like he had no business or idea what he was getting into when he went to that meeting, and like him misreading it, all of that stuff, like super like poignant and again hilarious. It's that idea that just like, I guess what it is it's the kind of thing where I kind of got it within the first 10 minutes of the episode, and the fact that there were still 11 minutes left of the episode really kind of dragged for me, and like really felt like, man, like you drove this nail in and you're just going to keep on hammering, and like and they're doing that on purpose. All of this is intentional, and for other people, clearly for you, like it works, and it's important.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that it's important to me. I guess I love seeing the joke go on long enough that it needs to be addressed in some way, because the fact that they took their one black character, and at the time he was just there. His name was, I believe, Token Stevens, and then they eventually, when they named him in Cartman's Silly Hate Crime 2000 in season 4, that's when his name became Token Black. It's one of those situations where at the time they were being satirical about the idea of the token black character, which if you look at the 2000s, I mean, things like, we watched Not Another Teen Movie. We did a very special episode on Not Another Teen Movie, and there's a whole character who's driven by the fact that I'm only here because I'm black. That's the only reason that I exist as a character. And it was a thing that teen movies and entertainment in general were kind of doing in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So it makes sense that these two guys who are creating the show that is supposed to be satirical and poking fun at the industry in a lot of ways would name their one black character Token Black.
Right.
Like it just does it. So then, but then the reveal that he's named after J.R.R. Tolkien, so his name is Tolkien Black. Like it's that wasn't always the case. Is I think where it falls on its face for me, and where it fell on the face for something like Twitter, because Twitter lost their minds. In like the reason I say it's a Mandela effect is the same way that is it Berenstain or Berenstain? It's Berenstain. Like that's just the fact of the matter. That's what the truth of it is. But you believe something for so long, and then you told that you're wrong, and immediately you become defensive about it. And the people who needed those other 11 minutes of it like being driven home are those people who went forward and were like, well, what about this episode where Token started a production company and named it Token Black Productions? And is like, okay, like maybe that's what he called it because that's what he wanted to name the production company. The fight to find proof that that has not always been the case added a meta level to the whole proceeding for me.
Well, right, because like it's that idea that plain and simple, it was not, right? But like the joke being that if you really go back and consider it always, like it is the rug being pulled out from under you, and they've earned the right to do something this fucking crazy because they literally are in season 25. And let's face it, they've been trying to get themselves canceled since like season 10. Like they've openly talked about their disdain for making this show certain at certain points in their life. And so just like they just wanted to fuck with everybody, and they did fuck with everybody. But at the same time, they also addressed a real big issue with their show, and like it is a huge accomplishment on their part to do so. So like, I don't think the episode is like offensive or shouldn't be on TV or any of that sort of crap. I think what it is I think watching the episode really kind of drove home the idea that I have aged out of the need for South Park in my life, whereas like when I was younger, it was definitely the kind of show that like I think I needed to latch onto because it let me know that there were other people out there that were either thinking the way that I did or, openly informed me about issues that I was not really aware of, things like that. I mean, a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier today with like the NFL and sports in general and the way that it's treated. They've done a lot of really good work to like really highlight some issues there. And any show out there that makes you reflect on yourself, like this episode made me reflect on myself, is not a failure by any means. It's one of those things where it's just like I've known for a while that South Park has not really been working for me over the last few years, and the episode really kind of drove home exactly that. Because like as much as I applaud everything that they did with that episode, I just found myself the entire time just not wanting to be watching it.
And I think that in some ways, that's why I asked you to watch it. No offense. I'm sorry for giving you homework that I thought might openly upset you. But it was just one of those things where, like, watching it, and I'm like, these guys, they've been in it for forever. And it's one of the weirdest things that they've always kind of been edgelords and sort of cringy with what they're doing. So watching them always try to stay on that edge of comedy has been really interesting over the last 25 years. If you really think about it, like they could have given up on South Park and they could have rested on their laurels. We've seen something like The Simpsons kind of do that. We've seen something like Family Guy kind of do that. But they've stuck to doing things that kind of make you uncomfortable because, oh my God, maybe they're not laughing with me at this joke, but they're laughing at me by making this joke. And it just felt like the most recent way for them to shine that light on it. And it worked for me. And it made me realize, because the Paramount Plus specials, the post-COVID specials, were very different from anything South Park that had ever come before. Sort of doing an all grown up with the characters and everything like that. It was very strange.
Yeah.
But to then come back to them being kids and being like, no, they're still able to do it. They just had a different story to tell about what it will mean post-COVID.
Yeah.
I don't know. It worked for me. But really, it was just how quietly they made the little retcon into the whole thing of like, no, his name's Tolkien. I couldn't name him J.R.R. Like,
yeah,
it was funny and it was exciting and it's nice that I can still be surprised by something that South Park does, because while it's not destination viewing for me anymore, it's something that I tend to check out. Like, it's not American Dad. I'm watching American Dad when it's new. But South Park, I'm like, oh, there's a new episode. I'll check it out when I have nothing else to do. And I don't know. It's thank you for watching the episode. is what I will say.
Yeah.
And on some level, I'm happy to confirm for you that it's still not a show for you.
I mean, like, you know what? If it was in like 7 or 10 minute bits, or like a YouTube like watch this every now and then, like when they could put an episode up type thing, I probably would still be totally on board for it. I think I just consume media in a different way than I used to too. Like it's not just that the show has changed. It has, but it's more that like the ways in which I take in this kind of like comedy slash like informative educational media, on top of the fact that it's also edgelord media. Like there's a lot going on in this show that I just it's just not the way in which I engage anymore.
I get that, and I understand. So thank you for doing it. And I don't know, I felt that way a bunch of times watching South Park, and then I still go, yeah, I'm gonna watch it. And I don't know what that says about me, but it's just the facts. All right. So do you have anything else to add, Sejum?
No. I mean, you know, everybody out there, check out the episode if you want. There was a whole bunch of other stuff this week that we're gonna have to address, like the Nintendo stuff. But other than that, I gotta go get ready for the Super Bowl.
Sejum's gotta go get ready for the Super Bowls with your winners, the Cincinnati Bengals. Did he triple down? Oh, he tripled down. If you'd like to yell at us about the fact that the Cincinnati Bengals didn't actually win the Super Bowl, Sejun is ready to take all of your complaints at Siege versus the World on Twitter.
And if they do win and you want to congratulate him on his call, you can find Dev at Devin T. Decker.
That's right. Modern day Nostradamus here, Devin Decker. All right. Until next time, thank you very much for stopping by. Will, please bring us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devin Decker and Stephen Selwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.